Hello, and welcome to the stream. How is everyone doing today? I'm just getting my brain together. We got some interesting stuff to talk about today. Let me just do one thing real quick. And... okay, we're set up. Did you guys see anything? Did you guys see TGS about FF16? Was there something about FF16 at TGS? We'll pause the music now. Anyway, I hope everyone is doing well. I hope you all had a wonderful weekend. And today we're going to be talking about a couple of things. The first thing is some comments that YoshiP made about Final Fantasy IX Remake, which is very interesting. Also very worrying, actually. Kind of has me like, I hope that is not the case. Also, for those of you who stuck around for the metaphor stream that we had last week, you knew that my microphone arm had broke. We have a brand new microphone arm. I haven't. It's got like the cable hiding, like features, or I guess to it. Like you're supposed to be able to run the cable through it. I haven't done all that yet. So, yeah, I just have the cable kind of dangling on the thing here. But eventually, I'll get that set up and we'll have the cable hidden, so it's not just like, you know, sitting there all lazily. In either case, that's good. I'm glad that we have a working microphone arm again. And this one's so much better too. The other one had like long survived past its lifespan and where it was supposed to be. I was supposed to recycle that thing a long time ago. It was already kind of broken before it like broke, unusably broken. And now it just kind of, snapped all the way. But we're good. We're back. 16 watches at $100,000 each. Wait, I didn't see this. What? Is that real, chat? Is that a real thing? Okay, I don't see anything. I guess I'm like looking at something different then. Luxury watches. Yeah, I don't see anything. Okay. I guess I'm tripping. Unless you guys got a link. Anyway. Oh, the Frank Mueller watches? Okay, but isn't that old? I looked that up and that was like from like... That's from like April, right? Okay, I thought that was a TGS. There's like a TGS thing that happened. Okay. That's from like April. So we're good. Okay. That wasn't something that I missed somehow. Okay. Just checking to be sure. You can never be too sure. Couch Potato, what's up, my guy? If they turn FF9 into a cinema-like escapade that FF7 remake turned into, I mean, FF7R probably won't be finished until the next generation. That's something to talk about today, was basically that, like, we really can't turn these like games into like the cinematic movie game type experience that say the re-trilogy is, or say, a game like 16 is. If you try to turn the old games into that, it's like so not going to work. How much was the Terra statue? I can't remember if it was 1,200 or 12,000. It was one of those numbers and it was absurd. But I want to say like 12,000. It was a really cool statue, though. It was a really cool statue. The Rec 24, thank you. Man. So, yeah. So we do have things to talk about today. I think we have enough people in here. We'll dive into it in just a little bit. What did YoshiP say about FF9? Okay, we'll go ahead and pull it up. we'll get started here. Let me do that. First, I kind of want to talk about this. Let me see something really quick. Okay, let me pull it up, chat. Um, so this is something I want to talk about first before we dive into FF9 stuff. So it's been really interesting to see that Final Fantasy VII was not anywhere in Astrobot, right? Because Astrobot has all these different references to a ton of different PlayStation games, and yet it's notably missing any Final Fantasy references. There's no Kingdom Hearts references. In fact, there is no Square Enix at all. And they were asked about this, and Astrobot Head says it's difficult to comment on why Final Fantasy VII's Cloud didn't make a cameo. Square Enix had no representation in the platformer referencing PlayStation's entire history. Article says Astrobot is stuffed with little robot guys cosplaying as gaming icons from across PlayStation history, but the game's lead has now opened up about one essential character that's missing. Sure, Astrobot's 300 collectible bots don't cover every single game from the platform's 3-decade run. Twisted Metal, SOCOM aren't included, for example, despite the PlayStation staples for the time, but the big boys are all here. Etc., etc., etc. Everyone noticed that Cloud wasn't there. This is the important part. In an interview with GameFile, Team Asobi studio head Nicholas Doucette, is that how you say it? Doucette? Hinted that the development team had eyed up a Cloud cameo that never got approval from Square Enix. It's difficult to comment on that. We really respect the choice of each publisher. That's really interesting, right? So we're not able to really discern why exactly Cloud wasn't in there. But we do know that based on this, it's saying that they have to respect the choice of each publisher. This to me implies that they did in fact reach out to Square Enix about the potential of having Cloud Strife in Astrobot. However, for whatever reason, Square Enix decided to decline, right? So that alone is interesting because you have to think, why would Square Enix decline, right? We're talking about growing the Final Fantasy brand. And, whenever we talk about growing the FF brand, one of the most important things I can think of is having, as many characters as humanly possible in everything. Funny enough, this is something that they've done really successfully with Nier, right? Like, 2B is in everything that she can possibly be in, and perhaps things that 2B doesn't even belong in, right? But when it comes to something as simple as having representation for Final Fantasy and Astrobot, it's not there. Dale, that's a great way of putting it. He says, this is the most politest way of saying, Ayo, ask your mans over there. It's not our fault. Right. That's basically what he's saying here. He's essentially saying, we tried, right? This is the most amount he can say. Listen, dude, we reached out to Square. We tried to get Cloud an Astrobot. Of course, we knew that Cloud should be an Astrobot. Like no shit, Cloud should be an Astrobot. But Square didn't put him in there, right? And again, I don't know what the factors are in deciding all of this, right? Like, I don't know, what goes on behind the scenes that lead Square Enix to make these decisions, right? However, I'll just say this. I'll just say this. If I was Square, I would bend over backwards in order to get Cloud representation in Astrobot, right? This is something that we talked about a lot on the podcast, where we're like, why aren't they doing more collaborations, getting the characters out there, really making sure that, the representation of Square Enix characters is is really proliferated throughout media, right? So I know what some of you guys probably think about Fortnite, right? But regardless of what you may personally think about Fortnite and modern service games and all that other stuff, Cloud Strife should absolutely be in Fortnite. If I was the one in charge of like things happening in Square, I would have Cloud, Clive Rosfield, and like maybe a couple of other FF characters. Maybe specifically from 7 or 16 or other titles like 10, popular titles that a lot of people kind of aren't at least vaguely familiar with. But I would have Cloud, Clive, at the very least, in Fortnite. I would have put Clive in every mobile game. And also, too, I do have to say, like, um, I really think that with Final Fantasy 14, they just did not leverage FF14 to market FF16 in the way that I thought that they should have, right? Because they already have an established base of people interested in their games. And so I do think that not leveraging the fact that that base is already established in 14 and loves your games, loves your style of doing things, to not put Clive in FF14 earlier than they did, because they did a collaboration, but that collaboration came way later, to a point of where that collaboration was just fan service. It wasn't going to really influence sales. Now, anecdotally, they actually did use Final Fantasy 14 to market another game previously, and it was really successful. At least anecdotally, I can tell you that it was really successful. That game was Near Replicant, because when they did the Near raids, I had so many people telling me Near Replicant is going to be my first Near game, because I played the Near collab in Final Fantasy 14. I did the raid series that they came out with, and I got really interested in the characters. And then I'm hearing that they're doing like a remake remaster. I don't know what you want to classify Replicant as, of that first Nier game. And so I'm going to go and pick it up. Purely because I played the content in Final Fantasy XIV, gave me enough familiarity, and that was enough to convert me, right? Anecdotally, we also talk about people, and Dell already mentions this in chat. I know of people that only played FF7 after meeting Cloud in Kingdom Hearts. Yes, we also talk about, we talk about FF fans picking up Kingdom Hearts, but we never talk about fans getting into Kingdom Hearts first and then picking up Final Fantasy. There's a lot of people who only knew Squall as Leon for a really long time. There's a lot of people that only knew Squall as Leon for a really, really long time because they had only played Kingdom Hearts. And then they went back and played Final Fantasy, right? So I think that Square is just not doing a good job of leveraging their IPs, even within their own stuff. before we even get into like smart collaborations and stuff like that, and they need to do a better job of leveraging that. Couch Potato says that's me. Dude, I bet it's a lot of people. I bet a lot of people picked up Kingdom Hearts and that was like their first exposure to Final Fantasy characters. And like I think for a lot of them, they were like, "Oh, so you mean to tell me there are more games like Kingdom Hearts, but like without the Disney part?" And I'm sure that they probably became interested like just on that alone, right? So again, I really see Square not having Cloud or any Final Fantasy representation within Astrobot to be kind of emblematic of this situation that has been going on with not putting their IPs out there well enough and not marketing. So, but again, I really do think it's funny because they've done it so well with Nier Automata. They've done it so well with Nier. Another company that I think that has really been doing it well with their IP specifically is Persona. And Persona 5 in particular, right? Persona 5 also has a collaboration with everything. I mean, Persona 5 has collaborations with stuff that it has no business even collaborating with, right? Persona 5 is everywhere. You cannot avoid Persona 5. Persona 5 is inevitable, right? But that's good. That's really good because there are so many people who probably have went and picked up Persona 5 through playing their favorite gacha games mobile collaboration, right? I'm almost surprised that there hasn't been a Persona 5 Final Fantasy 14 collaboration. Which, by the way, they should do because Phantom Thief Glam on my Warrior of Light would go absolutely crazy. I would love that. Persona 6 next year? Dude, I hope to God Persona 6 next year. Nothing would make me happier than Persona 6 next year. I kind of am like, maybe this is a hot take. I don't know. Maybe people will like hate me for this. I probably am more excited for the possibility of Persona 6 than I am for the possibility of Final Fantasy 17 at the moment. The reason I say that in part is because I know what Persona 6 is going to be, kind of. Like, I have a vague idea of what P6 will do and where it will take things, especially after playing Metaphor. I think that they kind of revealed a little bit about where they're going to be going with P6 in terms of gameplay at the very least. So I can be a lot more excited about P6 in the hypothetical. But who could be excited about FF17 in the hypothetical, right? It's really hard for me to be excited for like the hypothetical possibility of and not to say that I'm not, but it's just like unless you're a hardcore like Final Fantasy like nut like me or like you guys in chat, like it probably is hard to be excited about the prospect of FF17 because who the hell knows what it'll even be, right? I suppose there is some excitement about like what it like that prospect alone that it could just be anything. But yeah, it could be so anything that like it's just like, you know, who knows, right? So because there's so many exciting things they could do with it, which in itself is exciting. But then what if it isn't what you want slash like? Right. Exactly. Yeah, it's just too ambiguous. Like I'll be more excited for it when I know kind of like what it is. But right now I'm just like actually if I'm honest, the prospect of FF17 makes me nervous more than like excited Because I'm just like, oh God, what are they gonna do? What are they gonna do? That's what I'm thinking. I'm like, are they going to kind of listen to some of the feedback that we talked about? Are they going to have a more RPG presence with their mechanics? Are they going to lean into being more of an RPG? Having those type of hybrid elements that we want. Subtext, thank you for the tier 1. Seeing this on my screen, Square Enix will probably make their own Astrobot, just like their own Splatoon, and the cycle continues. Yeah, they'll call it like Final Fantasy My Robot Adventure or something. And it'll be exclusive to the Wii U store. I don't know. I would hope not, but you never know. Grand Blue Fantasy and FF14 should do a collab. Oh, that's actually a banger idea, Midnight. I think that's actually a really banger idea. Um, it's hard for the casual consumer to get excited for FF when each game might as well be a new IP. Yeah, that's kind of my point, right? Like, I think that for us in the chat, we can be excited for the prospect of Final Fantasy 17. Like it's really easy for us because we'll eat up anything Final Fantasy. But we're supposed to be thinking about the people that don't have the attachment to the brand name Final Fantasy, who just want to play a good game. Right? For those people, do they have a reason to be excited at the prospect, just the mere idea of a Final Fantasy 17? That's really difficult to say because they don't really have anything to go on, right? So, I mean, if they're imagining more Final Fantasy 16, if they're imagining more Final Fantasy 7 re-trilogy type style of games, they might be completely subverted when they get their hands on Final Fantasy 17 and it's absolutely nothing like 16 or Rebirth, right? And as I've said in the past, I think they could make more FF16. I think they can make more FF7 re-trilogy, and I actually think they'd grow either way. Like I think they'd grow if they made more FF16 even too. It's really just about choosing what they want to do, sticking to it, and then continuing to try to make that thing better and better, iterate on it, continue to make new styles of it. I think the problem is when they reinvent too much, yeah. That's the thing too, is that Final Fantasy reinvents everything, right? Like because it's constantly reinventing, you don't want to reinvent so much each entry too. Because after a point, you do lose the brand familiarity, right? And this is kind of the balance again that the old games had really well, where they'd keep stuff and say that, oh, this is the core Final Fantasy stuff, the stuff you can expect from every game. And then they'd switch up auxiliary stuff. And that would make it so that the game would always reboot, kind of. It would always be completely fresh, but because it did have that underlying familiarity to it, you could still identifiably say, okay, that's Final Fantasy. Is it a clickbait title or is there actually a new interview? It's not a clickbait title. We're okay. To wrap this up, they should have put Cloud in Astrobot. They should have had some type of representation there. The fact that there was no representation for Final Fantasy characters in something that was supposed to represent PlayStation as a brand, where Final Fantasy has been so crucial to FS brand, I think it was a huge mistake. This does seem to indicate that it was Square Enix's side of things that seemed to drop this ball. Square Enix should have done anything humanly possible to make sure that this character was in there. And when we talk about, marketing the IPs better, collaborations are an essential part of marketing in 2024. And yeah, I just view that as an L. Okay. Let's talk about. We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it. Boys. It's not good. It's not good, boys. I need to ask you, how did you even get into Final Fantasy? Playing the PC port of Final Fantasy VII on like Windows 98. That's how I got into Final Fantasy. Which is very different than like most people. But I played the jank ass numkey MIDI. Could you get to the actual news, please? Bro, what the fuck? This is the news. We're talking about the main thing in the title right now. We're about to talk. Chill the fuck out. You know what? I'm out for you, dog. Just take 5 minutes. A little break. A little small break. Calm down. Okay. So, Final Fantasy VII Remake is a multi-game saga. And the reason FF7 Remake is a multi-game saga is because it is an absolutely massive game. A game that is being expanded right now with the Final Fantasy VII re-trilogy. And it's becoming huge, right? Like Rebirth is several times the size of the original FF7, in part because they are, for one, making it 1-to-1 scale. Two, they're adding a ton of content to re-trilogy, making it even bigger. Many would argue better. Some people would not argue better, but at least from a gameplay perspective, I would argue better. And according to YoshiP, they might have the same idea sort of with Final Fantasy IX. Because in a recent interview, YoshiP has said that Final Fantasy IX Remake might not be possible as a single title. This is kind of worrying to me because when I've always thought about FF9 Remake since the leaks, I've been thinking about Final Fantasy IX Remake as one complete game that was a lot more true to the original FF9 in terms of gameplay and style and combat with a fresh coat of paint, right? That's what I've been thinking about when it comes to FF9 Remake. So now knowing that there is a possibility out there that FF9 Remake could be going the Final Fantasy VII Remake route, I'm sure it excites a lot of people, but also makes a lot of people kind of nervous. Because again, while I think the Final Fantasy VII re-trilogy is widely loved, I also think that FF7 re-trilogy, a lot of the criticism that it gets comes from its multi-part direction. Arguably, even a lot of the story stuff, a lot of the criticisms there also comes from the multi-part direction too, because they had to expand things in order to fill up 3 games. But let's go ahead and take a look at the article here. Let's just go ahead and skip straight to the YoshiP quote. Where is it? I think the interview was here with Games Radar. Yeah, so let's go over to the Games Radar version because that was the original. Oh man. Okay, here we go. Let me just sit right here. I'll move this guy. We'll keep it right there. All right. Hold on 1 second. Can I move this right here? There we go. That's perfect. Okay. Here we go. In an interview with Video Games, the website, I mean, your Xbox hasn't gained sentience yet, Yoshida says he's aware there are requests for a Final Fantasy IX. Yoshida says he's aware there are requests for Final Fantasy IX to be remade. But when you think about Final Fantasy IX, it's a huge game. It's a game with a huge volume. Similar to its PS1 siblings, Final Fantasy IX's polygonal world was stretched across multiple kingdoms, deserts, caves, marshes, wintry peaks, and unusual places that now seem to route by Final Fantasy standards. When you think about all of that volume, I wonder if it's possible to remake that as a single title, Yoshida says, probably alluding to the same problem Final Fantasy VII had with its trilogy of expensive remakes. It's a difficult one. It is a tough question. The article then says all that volume could be connected by a flat, barely detailed landmass old school JRPGs called the world map, but giving Final Fantasy IX the remake treatment would probably mean those locations would need to be stitched together more realistically, thus inflating an already huge game. So, again, keep in mind, he's saying this while presumably Final Fantasy IX Remake is already in development. Now, as the article does mention here, old school world maps used to have a relatively flat, not necessarily detailed by today's standards, world map, right? And the world map would have random battles and things on it. But one of the things that made making games of that scale a lot easier was having that world map, because you did not have to make one-for-one scale of all of the regions and all the different areas of the game. However, by the standard of modern fidelity, by the standard of modern graphics, having that super deformed style, having the large character walking across the small map is, at least according to Square Enix, at least according to the AAA lens through which they view these games, is considered no longer acceptable. And I think this is the reason that a lot of people preach about stylized graphics, and of course FF9, in particular, FF9 had stylized graphics too. But a lot of this has to be given up for the sake of realism, for the sake of AAA fidelity, for the expectations of what a modern video game is. And in a weird way, those expectations of supposed high quality is kind of like what's holding them back in the first place, right? The more detailed these video games become, the less abstraction becomes acceptable, right? The less the idea that things don't have to be as detailed becomes. And that is just creating a huge problem, right? I really do appreciate Final Fantasy VII Retrilogy. I think that Remake and Rebirth are probably the finest single player Final Fantasy games that we've gotten since Final Fantasy X, at the very least. Maybe even more, because I do think that Rebirth in particular hit like such an insane high level of quality. However, I mean, the biggest problem I have with selling these as separate games, even beyond the price point, the dev time, right? You're having one team dedicate, between these two games, probably a decade of their life. I'm assuming 2 games. It could be more, right? I would hope that it would at least be 2 games if they are leaning into multi-part. But you're having them spend a decade or more on remaking titles. And that makes me feel kind of dead inside just hearing about it. It makes me feel dead inside because I'm like, yeah, Dell, you put it right. What a waste of life. Like, these very talented developers having to spend a decade of their lives remaking someone else's work so you can have this really brief experience of reliving the 90s and early 2000s. That's the current reality of game dev, though, right? And of kind of like our remake obsession. And don't get me wrong, I'm not like 100% anti remake. However, I also see the trade off that the opportunity cost that comes with choosing to make a remake over a new work, right? Because there is a loss there that is incurred whenever you do a remake over a new work. The alternative approach could be telling the main story in just one game, but the side content would be released later as an expansion or DLC. Well, I think that the main game itself is like very content dense, and it's tough, right? I like remakes. A lot of the best games I've played in the past 5 years have been remakes, right? 7R trilogy, Resident Evil, all the Resident Evil remakes, really. Persona 3 Reload, huge, huge. I love Persona 3. Remakes are good. But I do wonder if our pursuit of remakes, our obsession with remakes, and the opportunity cost that we incur with remakes a lot of times is necessarily worth it, right? The popularity of remakes from the perspective of the corporate side is that you have a very low risk product that has a much higher chance of having a great ROI with lower risk. And the reason we have that obsession, or they have that obsession, because remember, this is the corporate POV. The reason corporations are looking at that and wanting that is because AAA is so out of hand. The better move to make is to remake something so that we can be safe, so that there is a better chance of having a return on investment that is substantial with low risk. That's what we're looking at when we talk about all of these remakes and such, right? I think the big conversation around FF9 in general is that stylized graphics does not mean graphics are bad. Right. But understand too, one of the hurdles that FF9 had when it released was that FF9 was kind of looked at like in an undesirable way because it did have more stylized graphics compared to something like Final Fantasy VIII. And people were looking for more of Final Fantasy like 7 and 8, like what they were pushing in terms of stylization, right? Which is actually kind of funny too, because you look at FF7 and the imagination, like your imagination as the player was really doing the heavy lifting there. Because practically speaking, FF9 is actually more realistic, quote unquote, looking than say Final Fantasy VII. But it's like, it's very much like, oh, um, this is how it looks, you know. This is how it looks in my head. This is the way I perceive it. But I also think that whenever you look at the artwork for Cloud, or you look at the artwork for Zidane, and you compare those two, I can understand how the artwork for Cloud alone would be more appealing to a younger edgelord audience than say the artwork for Zidane and Co. Stylized graphics doesn't speed up development in the way people think. In fact, in some ways, it makes development take time longer. I would explain if someone cared about the rant. Actually, I'd love for you to go on a rant about that. I think that would actually make a good I think that would make a good Twitter thread. But I also feel like some stylized graphic stands um would freak out. I think that the immediate thing that jumps out to me is that like with stylized graphics, you actually do spend a tremendous amount of time actually figuring out the art style. And that's something that people don't even think about, right? Whereas at least with like realism, we already kind of have the target in mind for like what we're trying to hit kind of intuitively. Whereas with stylized graphics, there is a lot of playing around with the textures, the materials, the way the eyes are going to look and the mouths are going to look, and like all this other stuff, and the visual effects, and how to actually achieve that stylized look. You know, an example would be Spider-Verse, right? Like, I don't think Spider-Verse would take less time than a live action movie because, Spider-Verse has, stylized visual. Or I shouldn't compare it to a live action movie. I should compare it to like a realistic CG movie. Okay, let's compare Spider-Verse to Kingsglaive, right? Like Spider-Verse would not take less time than like Kingsglaive, for example, with realistic CG graphics, right? So, or maybe a better, more apt comparison would be Blue People Avatar, right? Like Spider-Verse would not take less time than Blue People Avatar necessarily. Even though Spider-Verse is far more stylized than Blue People Avatar. So it is true that stylized does not necessarily mean cheaper. But it is true to say, as Leon Belmont puts it here, stylize making the game accessible to all consoles. Right, because you can come up with an art style that will allow things to be low polygon enough to run on the Switch, to run on less, or to run on weaker systems, I should say, to run on systems that don't have the same specifications as, say, a PS5 Pro or a high-end PC. Okay, so Dell says, I met an artist on the outsource team for KH3 that are based in Hyderabad, India. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. They explain that character works takes extremely long time as the sheer amount of iteration and redoing you have to do. Like you mentioned, you have to play with everything a lot for it to work. You can't just look at a real eye or a real photo of a jacket and imitate. So now you have two problems: iteration time, a nebulous goal, and you need to find artists who are capable of emulating that style, which is hard. Oh, oh dear. That's actually a lot to think about. Yeah, when you add all that together, um, it's really hard to say that stylized graphics are necessarily saving more time. Way easier to find artists that can make realistic stuff, right? Because when you say stylized art, each artist has their own style, right? Every artist is making their own thing. But I'll tell you what, every artist at some point has to study realism, right? So it is indeed true that stylized art does not necessarily save time. And with that being the case, I already think that Final Fantasy has a consistent art style that really works well for it. I think the hybrid realism anime art style that they currently have going on is already a banger. Is already iconic in the same way that Soejima's designs are for Persona, you know? In the same way that Akira Toriyama's designs are for Dragon Ball and Dragon Quest and those sorts of things. I think the anime realism hybrid that they currently have should be the style that they stick with going forward, because that's a really cool style. That's a style that's, kind of timeless and can evolve, and you can show anyone that stuff and they think it looks cool, right? Like, even like some of the dated CG scenes in like, like say FF10 that are 2 decades old, you still look at and like the visual style for the characters is still awesome. Even though it's like semi-realistic or whatever. And so all of that is to say, I completely agree, Dale. Like, I think that like the move necessarily isn't. I don't think the move is necessarily to shift you back to stylized graphics. I mean, for Final Fantasy IX Remake, of course, you do expect those stylized graphics. But I think that fidelity, the pursuit of fidelity is actually better than the pursuit of, or how should I say this? The pursuit of fidelity is the real issue, like Skyline is saying. It's not necessarily that that you're pursuing stylized graphics versus realism. It's about, we're pursuing realistic graphics, and you're going to be able to see, the stitch lines in a jacket in Ultra 4K. That we're going to be able to see the eyelashes on the character, and then it's going to be that detailed and all this other stuff. And then we're going to render things to that level. We're going to do all these different physics simulations and of cloth and like all this other stuff, and nothing can ever clip. So it's not necessarily the case that stylized equals cheaper, but it is the case that fidelity is really expensive. Now, here's where the other side of that nuance comes in, right? Fidelity, like realism requires more fidelity. So that is kind of the way that realism ironically ends up kind of taking the same amount of time or more time than stylized graphics, even though it has all the hurdles that we just mentioned. But because you have to put all that fidelity into realism, I guess it does end up kind of evening out, or maybe making realism take more time or cost more money and all these other sorts of things. And so, average character model on PS2 took 2 weeks. Now our character model is 3 weeks just for the hair. Could you imagine like where we would be in terms of like video games in general if character models were taking 2 weeks like they took on PS2? Could you imagine like where society would be? That would be incredible, right? And now, like Dale says, we're spending 3 weeks just making hair. Just the hair. Why does YoshiP keep opening? I'll just say, why does YoshiP keep talking about FF9 if he's not in charge of it? I have no idea. We assume that YoshiP is not in charge of it. Maybe he is. I'm under the impression that YoshiP is not in charge. CPU3 is not in charge of FF9. They might be, because he did say that CPU3 is working on a couple of He's working on a couple of stuff. Couple of stuff. He did say that CPU3 is working on a couple of games, right? And we know that one of them is Final Fantasy Tactics Remastered. And we know that one of them is Fantasian. I assume that someone else is handling Final Fantasy IX. But maybe he is. We don't know. Because he gets interviewed more often. I mean, YoshiP gets interviewed more often than anyone at Square Enix for sure. You're definitely right about that. Which is cool. That's what we like about YoshiP in particular, is that YoshiP is out there. He's transparent. He's honest about these things. He communicates, where a lot of this stuff is very opaque. He's also extremely honest about, what goes on with developing games. Sometimes he's too honest and he reveals too much and he gets himself in trouble. But we really appreciate it nonetheless. I really appreciate it. Because there's not too many people, especially, with Japanese game dev, where a lot of this stuff does tend to be opaque and you can't really, know about like the real reasons behind certain things or like what budgets are like or how much time things will take. And YoshiP will just come out and just explicitly say all of it, to really explain why certain decisions were made. And yeah, it sucks that like more, Japanese devs can't just be transparent about what's happening because of the corporate structure there and kind of the culture. But YoshiP doesn't care. He'll just he'll say whatever's on his mind, and I think he's really based for that. He's a really cool guy. As you guys know, I love some YoshiP. If F9 remake was happening, YoshiP wouldn't be saying anything about it. Actually, I think it's the opposite. If FF9 remake was happening, he would just be saying like, I don't comment on rumors and speculation. I think, well, no, actually, you're right. I don't know, actually. Maybe you are right. I feel like FF9 remake has just leaked so much that no one even cares anymore. It's just like a talked about thing, right? Like, I'm gonna be blunt, not gonna buy a multi-part FF9. So many great games come out that stand alone. I don't have time to wait 15 years to finish a remake. FF7R is the first and last time I'll do it. I think that FF7R was a very valuable and interesting experiment in the idea of a multi-game remake. And I think that when you look at the sales performance of Rebirth and where we expect the sales performance for the next game to be, I think it's made it very clear that multi-game remakes probably should not be a thing going forward. I think that has been kind of clear here, right? Like, I don't think that the multi-game remake is the way to go moving forward. Part of it is just that when people play the first game, right? You have to get people to finish the first game to even be interested in the second part, right, of the next remake game. And so, for however many people bought Final Fantasy VII Remake, which we know is around 7 million now, of those 7 million people, how many of those people actually finished Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 1? Whenever you look at, like, the data on people finishing video games, it is actually pretty depressing compared to the number of people who buy them. People buy a lot of video games, but people finish a very small number of video games. I'm projecting right now. I really am. Because I buy so many video games. I don't know about you guys, but like my library is thick. How many of those games I like actually get around to like seeing the credits of? Not nearly as many as I buy. Don't get me wrong, I play a ton of games. But how many of them that I actually like finish? Yikes. Because I'm always moving on to the next thing. We all do that, I think. No, we definitely all do. Like, I think that most people do that. Otherwise, I wouldn't be self-reporting. You know, I'm self-reporting, but I also think that everyone else can really hop in on that and say that yeah, I too have not finished nearly as many games as I bought. I also think that's fine, by the way. You don't have to finish everything in your backlog. I think you only really need to finish like the stuff that like keeps you interested long enough to finish, right? Like, so yeah, you know. We got a super chat here from Giant Monkey Butt. Thank you so much. There's also the FF9 remake that's supposed to come out. Couldn't the remake share the same art style of the anime and release together? Where's the anime at? That is a great question, Giant Monkey Butt. I think to answer your question, I think that is what's happening, right? Like, I think that is what the plan is. That the FF9 anime and the FF9 remake are going to launch simultaneously, right? And they are going to be prepared to launch next to each other. And one is not going to launch without the other. So I also think that if, if the game is having any issues, they're going to delay the anime. If the anime is having any issues or is behind schedule, they're going to delay the game. That might suck for some of you. Some of you may not like that. However, if I were to put it this way, the amount of sales it's going to increase to have it there simultaneously is huge, right? How many of you went and played Cyberpunk because you saw Cyberpunk Edge Runners? Me. I went and played Cyberpunk because I watched Edge Runners, right? A lot of people did. Yeah, a lot of people in chat saying me. Now imagine if Cyberpunk the game was like 6 months after Edge Runners came out. You probably would have maybe like, you put it on the back burner. If you really liked Edge Runners, yeah, you would have went and picked it up. But for a lot of people, they kind of would have just, it would have slipped their mind over time. So it's really important that if they're going to do the anime and game approach, they need to have the anime available when the game is able to be purchased. I don't think that they should ship the FF9 anime if the game is not there to go and purchase. Because I think that if the FF9 anime turns out to be good, and you get like 5 or 10 episodes into the anime, and you're like, oh my god, I love this. You mean to tell me there's a game? You guys, The Witcher 3 saw an explosion of sales as a result of The Witcher live action, which unfortunately has gone to absolute crap past the first season. First season was amazing, and then it went terrible, but it saw staggering sales. I think they said they sold more copies of The Witcher 3 after the live action came out than they had sold at all up to that point. The same thing happened with us with The Last of Us when the HBO series dropped. Yeah. The Last of Us saw a very similar boost after the HBO series dropped, which is why they wanted to have The Last of Us Part 1 out, the remake of the PS3 version of the game, because they were like, oh my god, this thing is going to sell like crazy if we line the things up. And sure enough. The Fallout games, dude, recently with the Fallout games got a massive boost in sales thanks to the success of the Fallout series on Amazon Prime, which if you haven't seen, please go watch it. It is so good. Imagine if there was a Castlevania game that you could have went and bought when the Castlevania anime came out. Imagine, dude. If you could buy a Castlevania game when the Castlevania games came out, or when the Castlevania anime came out, That would have been huge. Stinky Duck, thank you so much for this super chat. What do you think about these comments from YoshiP? Do you think Creative Studio 3 carrying this title, and if it doesn't share the battle system of 16, could there be another battle system entirely for FF9? Oh, do I think Creative Studio 3 is carrying this title? Okay. Again, thank you for the super chat, Sneaky Duck. I think considering the number of times that YoshiP has talked about FF9 Remake, and I also think too, when you consider the number of references to FF9 in Dawn Trail specifically, I do think that there is a strong chance that somewhere in Creative Studio 3, they are the ones working on Final Fantasy IX Remake. That being said, when it comes to battle mechanics, I absolutely do not believe Final Fantasy XVI's battle mechanics are being used for FF9. I think if that's a concern of yours, or I think if that's something you might be excited for, in either case, I do not think that is going to be something that happens. I do think that they are probably going to stick to turn-based. According to a lot of the rumors that we've seen, they seem to say that it's turn-based. So that's actually very good. He said himself he wouldn't make FF9 an action game. Also, that's true. I forgot about that. YoshiP himself had a quote out there where he said that he would not make FF9 an action game. I believe him. A lot of people were actually concerned and worried, which is why he commented that on in the first place. Because he was like, no, guys, if I was remaking FF9, I would not make it an action game. So I don't think you have to worry about FF9 being turned into Final Fantasy 16. I don't think YoshiP would do that. I think YoshiP is willing to try a lot of new things when it comes to making a brand new original title. But I think just judging from the way he works on Final Fantasy 14, that YoshiP has a lot of respect for the older Final Fantasy titles. And because of that respect that YoshiP has, I don't think he would try to turn FF9 into an action game. I think he would be like, that's a bit too much, even for me. That makes me very optimistic. That's good. Once more, I just want to say thank you for the big super chat, Stinky Duck. I really appreciate that. I suspect DMC5 will also grow in sales after the Netflix animation drops, right? I think DMC5 will explode in sales if that anime is even remotely good. This being said, it is time for Square Enix to return to the animation and film industry. However, I do not think it is time for Square Enix to do it internally. I don't think it's time to put out another Kingsglaive or another Advent Children. What I think it's time to do is to get a quality anime studio or a quality film studio and get them to make quality animation and quality film, because that's what those teams do, right? You wouldn't get a film team to make games, and you shouldn't get a game team to make films. Hot take, I know. Josh Z, thank you so much for the super chat. I have played 9 more than any other FF game. I agree with YoshiP. There are so many castles and big architecture locations. You can't fit all of them in a single game. Josh, thank you so much for the super chat. There is a lot of content in 9. You're not wrong. It's huge. The only way I can consider making FF9 all possible within one game. Turn-based is a lot cheaper to make than action, and it is a lot faster to make than action combat systems. Unless I'm missing something. If Dell is still in the chat, he can fact check me on that. But I'm pretty sure that's sound reasoning to say. So they would be saving a lot of budget and time when it comes to at least keeping the game turn-based. it helps, but art is always the biggest cost of development. Would it be because I know the assets would still like the meshes would all probably cost the same. So would all the textures, materials, and stuff like that to produce. But I think the thing that I always thought with like turn-based being cheaper is like animations and QA being cheaper. He's talking about locations. Yeah, no, to be clear, I was saying that like I guess what I meant by that was that like if you have more budget available from if you have more budget available for that stuff through choosing to go through cheaper routes otherwise, then maybe it would make the game cost less overall, but that's not necessarily going to be the case. Subtext, thank you for the super chat. It sounds a whole lot like you're ready for the return of FF7 The Last Order. NSP is a Last Order fan confirmed. Okay. Here's the thing. I do think the creators need to be involved with it, right? So I do think you do need like Anomina overseeing it, but I don't think he should necessarily be directing it or writing it necessarily. And that's I'm using him as an arbitrary example there. I'm not saying him specifically. But I do think that you need people who know what they're doing in terms of creating something specifically for film or animation, right? It's one of the reasons that Studio Trigger was able to do such a great job with Cyberpunk Edge Runners, right? Is this the Midori thing? Oh, that's the Midori thing. I mean, I don't want to talk about the Midori. I mean, I do, but it's kind of like it's kind of spicy to talk about now, right? Because of all the stuff that they did. So I'm sure that information does have like some legitimacy to it, but yeah, no. And it's not to say that oh, it's Midori must be wrong or anything because they still have some they still do have some like accurate stuff. But yeah. I mean, it just causes a shitstorm every time you mention it, so yeah. What can you do? Even if you have more stylized art direction, you have to think about it on a cost per asset basis. An NPC character would take 1 week to make on PS2. That same stylized PS2 would take about 5 weeks on PS5. That's insane. So yeah, you're no longer making basic polygons, creating UV coordinates and painting polygons. You now need to make the model, the mesh, then create a high resolution sculpt that takes weeks to capture details, then bake the details down, create its shaders for all the materials. The hair strands alone can take weeks. So then, um, what would you say about styles like say Persona 5, Dale? I'm really curious because like from my understanding, Persona 5 had like a peak of like 70 developers working on it at like the height of its development. And so I'm curious, like when you have like that type of stylized graphics, is that like does that get to the point of where like we really start saving money? Okay. So Persona is a good example, right? Because I think when people say stylized graphics, they're thinking of like making it look like Kingdom Hearts 3, right? Like Kingdom Hearts 3 is probably really expensive graphically, actually. Like graphically, Kingdom Hearts 3 probably costed as much as like Final Fantasy 7, you know? Like it was probably just as expensive. That would take a lot, but it would still take quite a few weeks per character. Persona cheats a lot, right? That makes sense. It's that ability to cheat a lot that's where you really get things like making a game with school uniform means that you're reusing a lot. Yeah. Faceless NPCs. It's genius. So, yeah, all of that being said, I do not want Final Fantasy IX Remake to be a multi game saga. I do think that that is one thing with this game that could dampen my excitement for it if it does end up being a multi game. I think that we've seen a lot of varying success with it for 7 Re-Trilogy. I think that these multi-game remakes just take way too long, and it's just a lot better to have these developers, working on different games rather than spending, a decade of their life just remaking one title, right? Because while I do think that remakes have a good place, I don't know if doing remakes on that scale is necessarily the place to do it. And honestly, if it's going to take that long to just remake Final Fantasy IX, then I really think perhaps we should be looking at just making brand new Final Fantasy games instead. That's my take on that. Any game that has offices or schools is a lot cheaper for environments too. Yeah. Remakes outside of Japan destroy your studio too. Only Japan studios survives remakes. I'm curious what you mean by that. Another great example for FF9 art style is World of Final Fantasy as well. Yeah. And someone else mentioned like Visions of Mana. I think that's also good. FF11 offline is a better time investment. I think so too. Like if we have to do like 3 Final Fantasy 9 games, then I would just make FF11 offline. That would be like more interesting to me than because FF11 offline would at least be a brand new game for most people, whereas Final Fantasy IX remake is probably not going to be a brand new game for most people. So and then also too, one of the reasons that Final Fantasy VII remake again, with the multi-game structure in place, they have to make up a lot of new shit in order to fill the disc. So unless you want like plot ghosts in FF9, maybe you do. I don't know. Think about everyone who joined a place like Naughty Dog. Best of the best artists, animators, creatives. They came to that studio to create something. To make 2 remakes, everyone at their peak of their career will leave. Japanese people don't share this cultural norm. Right. Right. That makes perfect sense. And I get it too, because like, if you're at the peak of your creativity and you're told to just redo another guy's work, that fucking sucks. That sucks. And this is kind of like the thing about like this debate with remakes, right? We talk so much about remakes, and there is kind of this like discussion remake good versus remake bad. That's like the kind of discourse that you see on like Twitter, right? And I don't think it's like remake good versus remake bad. And like a lot of people who are very pro remake are just like, there are no downsides, there are no drawbacks to the number of remakes that we're pushing out. Like there is no problem with it whatsoever. It is only upsides, and like there's no bad sides to this many remakes whatsoever. And that's not true. That's so not true, right? There's opportunity cost with everything. And I do think that the cost of doing all of these remakes is that developers that could be working on new original games or not, and budgets that could be going to new original games or not. Sometimes it is still worth doing a remake despite that. There are a lot of great remakes out there. There's a lot of remakes that are doing really interesting things. At the same time, though, too, you have to make a sort of like, you have to make a sort of trade off, right? Okay, I'll give you a perfect example. Final Fantasy VII Re-Trilogy. I'm not saying that Final Fantasy VII Remake should have never happened when I say this, right? I'm just saying that this is the reality of the trade-off. Final Fantasy VII Re-Trilogy could have just been two brand new Final Fantasy games, right? That could have been like 17 and 18. But it's Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth, right? It could have been two games, two different mainline entries, right? But it ended up just being, you know, one. So you do have to think, if I'm going to make a multi-game remake, or if I'm going to do like all of these remakes, is the opportunity cost of me being able to make other games, again, Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth could have been Final Fantasy 17 and 18. I do love Remake. However, that's the opportunity cost. And so I would not say that remakes are like purely good and there are no drawbacks to them whatsoever as we do them, right? There's always opportunity cost. That does not mean that remakes shouldn't exist. It's to say that maybe every remake ever is not necessary, right? Like there does come a point where we do have to say, okay, maybe let's not remake that. Maybe let's make another thing instead of remaking instead of just like, digging things up from the grave and remaking and remaking and remaking, right? Like especially when you have really great creatives, you know, really, creatives at the top of their game remaking something that probably shouldn't be remade. I mean, if I could, if we could remake everything and it was like a good, like agreeably good remakes for every single project in the world, and everything was updated to be even better than before, then I think that'd be awesome, right? Like, who wouldn't want that? But realistically, in terms of like, reality, people have to work on that. And you can't just, relegate a remake of a property to the B team. And we've seen this happen, actually. We've seen this happen personally within our own community. We've seen Final Fantasy VII Remake attempt to be developed by CyberConnect 2. With no disrespect to CyberConnect 2, I don't think that they have a game that, in my opinion, warrants the prestige of remaking Final Fantasy VII, right? Like, that's something that really requires prestige in order for you to be able to handle. That's like one of the most sensitive IPs ever, That's like the core of Square Enix in a lot of ways. And so you can't just let anyone handle that. You have to make sure that the right qualified people are working on it. But I mean, that's the problem though, too, right? You have Kitase, Nomura, Toriyama, right? You want those guys to be working on a Final Fantasy VII remake. You wouldn't want a Final Fantasy VII remake without those guys, right? At the same time, don't you guys kind of want like a Final Fantasy 17 from those guys, a Final Fantasy 18 from those guys, right? This is where we get into the false belief that remakes don't take away from new games, right? Like that's not necessarily true. That's actually kind of that's a half truth. Or it might be like false outright, to be honest. You know, each person realistically is only capable of working on one game at a time. Maybe not Nomura. He's capable of working on too many things and gets himself spread thin. But it's not realistic to expect these people to work on 3 or 4 games at one time, right? All those guys got about 2 to 3 games left in them. It takes too long to make a game now. Right, exactly. And so, again, I'm not saying that FF7 should not have been remade. I'm just using it because it's the easiest example. Of course, FF7 should have been remade. Um, but I'm explaining to you that the cost of us remaking it is that in this same timeline, we could have had Final Fantasy 17 and 18 by CBU1, by Toriyama, Nomura, Kitase, and those people. And the reason we don't is because they have to work on Final Fantasy VII Remake. Which dog timeline is that? It's the Shiba Inu timeline. So this idea that remakes don't ever take from anything else is not true, right? Because at any point in time, those developers, that team, that budget could have also been used to make a brand new game in a series or just a brand new IP or anything else, right? Again, I want to reiterate one more time, I am not saying that I don't think remakes should exist. I do think remakes should exist. What I'm saying here is that whenever a remake is chosen to exist, it has to make sense. It can't be every single game ever because remakes are just so fun, right? Because we are sacrificing some of our resources. You know, we're sacrificing time, life to be able to remake these games. And so as a result, we do have to look at games being remade and say, this is something we should do, right? Like preserving Final Fantasy VII's story and characters is an important thing to do. So we have to do that. Even if it means we can't get Final Fantasy 17 and 18 out during that time, and 19 if you count part 3. So, you know, whenever you see people say, like, oh, well, remakes aren't stopping new games from coming out, kind of, but also kind of not. Like, you know? Um, yeah. Like, people will say, oh, well, Final Fantasy VII Remake didn't stop Final Fantasy 16 from coming out. But, like, I'm like, yeah, it stopped Final Fantasy 17 from coming out, dude. That's my point. That 17 would have been out like right after 16. That's that's where remakes actually stop new games from being made. So anyway, yeah, remakes are good, but they're not like it's not like remakes have no downsides. which is what a lot of people who are very pro remake, people will say that they should just remake as many games as humanly possible. That's not true. That would that would that would hurt things more than help. Let's not forget this is art. Art has a retirement age. Yes, 60 is the standard in Japan, but there are game devs that still work past that. Even creatives here still work into their elder rate. Yeah, that's true. Hand to heart, what would you give Rebirth out of 10? I don't really like to score my stuff, but I would give it somewhere in the 9 range for sure. Now, do I think that remaking Final Fantasy IX specifically is worth it? I do think that remaking FF9 is worth it, predicated on the idea that FF9 would be one game. But if it's going to be multiple games, then I don't know if it's worth a full decade plus. Even for Final Fantasy VII, we're starting to see some fatigue. And Final Fantasy VII was thought of being as like inexhaustible in a lot of ways. And even with that one, we're still starting to see like a lot of people kind of like, wearing down on it. So we'll see. Hopefully that's not the case. There's a remake experiment happening right now that will affect the Japanese industry. The new Metal Gear Solid Snake Eater is a complete remake made entirely by an outsourced company based in China. If it works out, it'll get a lot of new contracts. Oh, yeah, that could change completely everything. That could change everything by a mile. The other thing too is that, Snake Eater is also like MGS Delta is like not even MGS Delta is like not even the voice acting is not even being recorded. It's like straight up just this is the game again with better graphics and quality of life features. So I do think we'll get to a point though of where remakes are kind of like people are kind of burned out on them. That's not true about Snake Eater. Uh, it's both in-house and out. Okay, appreciate the clarification. The dev team is from China, but the Japanese side still controls the creative direction. Okay, that's what I was thinking though, right? Like, but I mean, of course that's how it would be for anything, right? Like it wouldn't be like the Chinese team ever controlling the creative direction. Okay, Dell visited them in Shanghai. Okay, he knows what he's talking about. The Japanese team are just signing off on things. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Holy crap, then. That's really interesting. And see, that's what they were going to do with FF7R originally too, which is insane to think about. That FF7R would be handled like that. It's a Konami collab with OG teams and Virtuos who worked with a lot of time, who they worked with a lot of times before. Also, hello Blitz, how you doing, bro? Right. So the Konami is basically doing a lot of the high level creative stuff, right? And then I'm sure the dev team in China is executing on most of it. That makes perfect sense. That would be good and bad. I think remakes getting fatigued would mean hopefully people are more open to newer projects instead of just banking on nostalgia. That's like another thing too. Like whenever we fixate on remakes and stuff like that, we also kind of send the message to corporations, we don't want new stuff. We send them the message that we have that like we want like the same shit again please don't make anything new. And like when you have to spend like 150 million, $200 million on a game, the idea of not making anything new, we want the same thing. We want like, something very predictable. It's a very appealing idea. Virtuos is the company. The company has like 7,000 employees, and they used to only do outsourcing. This is the first time actually taking the whole game like Bluepoint did. I see. Yeah, I could see like if that is successful, we would see a lot more companies like Bluepoint where all they do is remakes. Right? Like if Delta is successful, I could see companies like popping up and like their entire like gimmick is that they remake games. And then that's all they do. It's just remake games, right? And because there's a final game like in mind, they're able to work a little bit more autonomously than companies that aren't, right? So they'd just be able to like, I hate to say it like this, but like it's possible we could have just like remake factories where people are just like remaking stuff and like people are just that's not those studios' end goals though. Okay, cool. I'm glad to hear that. I wouldn't want that to be like the kind of reality of things that happen because I wouldn't want it to just be like there's just like a ton of studios that all they do is just remake games and they like it's like a remake factory, right? I wouldn't want that to be the case. Wasn't there rumors they were gonna remake the original God of War? I think that remaking the original God of War would be like a cool, interesting thing to do. They want to become remake factories only to train the dev process and get experience on someone else's dollar. Then they want to graduate to making their own games. Okay, that's cool. That's a solid plan. That's like a really solid plan, actually. Yeah. Visions of Mana was also outsourced to another company. A lot of video games made today depend on tons of outsourcing studio. Outsourcing is way more present in the industry than people notice. Yeah. Outsourcing is the industry. I'd go as far as to say, like, so much shit is outsourced now that, like, without outsourcing, there is no video games, period. FF9 deserves a remake more than FF7, much better pace for multiple games, and would have been a better start to remaking the old games than going to 7 first. It's hard for me to agree. Like I can see where you're coming from, but like at the same time, if they announced a remake of another game instead of FF7 at that time, the backlash would have been huge. Everyone would have been like, "Where is Final Fantasy VII?" The the reason a game gets chosen to be remade is heavily predicated on how popular it is, right? And how much they think it'll sell. And everyone would have been pissed at like FF9 remake at the time if it was announced first and that game came first over FF7 remake. And that would have been viewed as a mistake, honestly, in the long run. Regardless of how you feel about 7 or 9, the climate at the time was simply that like why the fuck aren't they remaking FF7? So I don't think I could agree that oh like they should have just remade 9 first. Even if it was better fitted for the style hypothetically, I don't think that like it would have been like the right idea. So is this the studio? Kind of centered here. Oh, this is crazy. They outsourced for all these: Horizon, The Last of Us, Ghost of Tsushima, Diablo 2, Control, Horizon, Cyberpunk. Wow, okay. So they do a lot. Let's take a look. They do a lot. They do a lot. Kevin, thank you for the super chat. FF9 will be split into seasons. It makes sense that the show will be split into multiple games. Also, the FF9, I knew the rumors of the game being smaller scale was BS. This is Square Enix. Thank you again, Kevin, for the super chat. Yeah, I mean that would also be pretty sensible too, right? Like if part one of the game covers season one, and then part two of covers season one of the anime, and then part two of the anime covers the second game. That would also be really good. But also, exactly what you're mentioning, why aren't we doing that with Final Fantasy VII, right? So, like, well, how come, like, Final Fantasy VII Remake, like, the first game, FF7 Remake, the first game, should have been an anime, right? Like, it should have been an anime as if you gallery on Alan Wake 2. Okay. FF7 Remake, the first game, should have been an anime that came out like leading into Rebirth. Why wasn't it, right? That makes no sense for it not to be. So I agree with you that would be like a good plan. Hopefully that is what Square Enix is doing, but yeah, we don't know. So almost every character in the game was made by these guys in India. That's insane. Holy crap. It's also insane too that like you were commissioning people just for the hair. Right? Even the hair is something that they would like outsource. And you never heard of them? Yeah. And that's crazy. But they've worked on like so many of our favorite games. That's insane. Man, dude. But if you think about it too, with the amount of time that all these models take to make, there's no way you could ever do it in-house, right? Like you have to spend the money and you have to have another studio working on it, like working on like all these meshes because you know there's no way to simultaneously get all this stuff done, right? So you have to spend the money and pay people. These guys are probably better than the average US artist too, because they do this all day long and they do nothing else. Holy crap, that's insane. That's insane. Hold on, I want to see what they do on Cyberpunk. Let's see what they did on Cyberpunk. Okay. It's not as extensive on Cyberpunk. Actually, it's like less than 10 things that they did on Cyberpunk. It's not as crazy. With Cyberpunk, they just help with the demo. Oh, okay. And then they're like specifically like have like this whole page where it's like, yeah, we work on hair. We work on hair a lot. Oh no. Oh no. Yikes. I think they forgot to take that one down. Yeah. Oh man. Oh, for a second I thought this was John Kratos. But that is not John Kratos. The dude from Jedi Survivor. I was gonna say. Chat. I was like, that's crazy. They made Kratos' beard. I do find it funny when people on Twitter say PlayStation are the best at hair, when it's the same hair artist who might have worked on an Xbox game. Yeah. They don't mean PlayStation. They mean these wonderful artists in India are the best at hair, and it's true. Also, they act like only like the PlayStation hardware can like render the hair when that's also like not the case. Right? Like that's really cool. So let's look at the team's portfolio. Tom Cruise. Who is she, chat? Is this a character in particular? Really nice. That's cool. The Ghost of Tsushima stuff's really impressive. Let's take a look. They had to learn how ancient Japanese clothes are constructed. Holy crap. That's so crazy. Wow, this is so crazy. Wow. Holy fuck. You know, it's weird because like you kind of like you see it um on the games and like in the game, but like when you actually look at it like this, you actually get like a deeper appreciation of it. It's kind of crazy that like um that people have spent this much time and effort making it. So anyway, yeah, this is the reality of game dev. This is what we're looking at, chat, when it comes to making these AAA games. Video games are hard. Video games are very difficult to make. Very time consuming. And the type of games that we used to make are no longer viable for the AAA space. And to make matters worse, because these games are so expensive, people want a very guaranteed return on investment, which means that you get more remakes, less bold sequels, basically no new IP. And if you do get new IP, the new IP is very derivative of everything that currently exists because making something new is, you know, I don't know if I'm going to get my 200 million back. So you need to make it like a third person open world action game RPG with some Genshin Impacts in it and some Fortnites and make it a service game and those sorts of things, you know. Josh, thank you for the super chat. I think this is your second super chat. Thank you so much. I'll be honest, the FF fan base is having too much trouble making up its mind about the game they want as SE is. Yeah. Well, you know, Josh, like one of the things that's happened is that with Final Fantasy, I think that Square has created a lot of different fan bases for each Final Fantasy. Like Final Fantasy as a fandom itself is kind of not real, right? Like Final Fantasy is not a fandom per se. It's 16 plus different fandoms that have different desires and wants for things to happen, right? And so, and within that 16 different fandoms, there are like probably 3 or 4 main camps, right? You have like the people that want 16 to be the main kind of thing going forward. You have the people that want like Rebirth to be the main thing going forward. You have people that just want something completely new. They're like, "Yep, keep going." And then you have the people that are like, they need to go back to turn-based. Right? So you have those four different, groups of people that are all wanting different things. So, what do you do? What do you even do? Like, what do you make that makes them happy? Excuse me. I hope you didn't hear that belch. I belch a lot actually whenever I talk for a long time or whenever I sit for a long time. I don't know why. Makes me like belch a lot. Um Genshin Impact gets 17 million players daily and Fortnite gets 30 million. Those kids don't want to play any new games. How the hell do you get those guys to play a new FF? Like, it's very difficult. It's very difficult, right? To some extent, it does make me wonder about console gaming in general, right? And like, we say Gen Z, like we kind of highlight Gen Z. I don't think Gen Z as much is the problem. Maybe younger Gen Z, but really Gen Alpha, right? Like Gen Alpha for sure is going to be gotcha pilled, right? And this is not to say something bad about like all gotchas, because there's some decent gotchas out there, but like it does suck too, because like it is kind of like training the younger audience to believe that games should be free and that the gambling mechanics that are in like a lot of gotchas, like the very, put the money in and pull a thing type mechanics are acceptable and normal, and that's how video games are, where you spend, you can spend hundreds of dollars um on a single video game, thousands even. It's worrying. So thank you for clarifying that. I'm Gen Z and I hate gotcha right. A lot of Gen Z grew up on like still kind of grew up on like 360 and like PS3, right? So and some of them may have even, grew up on like PS2 even, like being their first console. So it is somewhat unfair when we say like, oh, is Gen Z is really Gen Alpha. He's really Gen Alpha because plenty of Gen Z still plays console games. It's really like very young Gen Z and like very old Gen Alpha. That's like if you want to like point to a group that's like a problem for console gaming. But most Gen Z still plays like console games, guys. So most of them still, but also too like older Gen Z is not that much younger than me. All right, because we talked about this. I'm 33. Older Gen Z is like late 20s. So I mean, we're still roughly the same age. Like I said, I probably have more in common with them at this point in my life than I would with like say someone who is like older millennial who's like in their mid 40s or like early 40s. So, um if you're in your 30s, aren't you? Yeah. That's what I'm saying, right? So like but older Gen Z is like 27 and like younger, right? So and it's like they're spending more on microtransactions than actual games. Even AAA games cost less than what some people spend on drugs. Yeah, yeah. It's actually very funny because there is a lot of people who will be like oh, $70, I'm not gonna spend that, and then go spend like $200 on like skins in like Fortnite or something or some other game, battle passes and shit. And it's just really weird because I'm like, wow, you won't spend $70, but you will spend like hundreds of dollars on like skins for a game that you play for free. What the fuck? That shit like does not make any fucking sense to me like whatsoever. Like I'm personally unable to comprehend that like entirely. Um like for me that's like straight up like what the fuck. The FF9 news was earlier for those of you who keep asking about it. Um, you can skim back through the VOD if you like. Makes sense about the crack cocaine epidemic of the 80s. The first one is free, yeah. Right, because you want them to try, right? And again, I'm not saying like all gotchas are bad or anything like that, or all service games are necessarily bad. But it's very clear that, and how can you blame younger gamers too for like being interested in a service game and a free to play game when you don't have any consoles or anything, but your parents did get you this tablet, you know, and all these games on this tablet are free, and so you could just download games on the tablet for free and then play like infinite different games, right? That's a hell of a deal for a kid growing up. I don't know about you guys. I sat around bored for days because there was no new games coming out, right? There was nothing new to put in my PS2 or my GameCube. Not because there weren't games coming out, but because mom didn't buy me anything. And so the fact that I don't need mom to buy me anything new, if you're a kid now, and you can just go hit the download button and it's there on your system and you can play an infinite amount really for free. It does kind of condition their preference for something like that, right? Like one, they begin to prefer games that don't have endings to them, right? So it's something that goes on in perpetuity. Two, they begin to prefer games that have social elements in them because all these games have different social elements because that's part of their essentially dopamine loop. So single player games kind of get like BTFO'd in that way from their preferences. Uh and three, they prefer something that's free right now and then they can just pay for stuff later. So and they aren't doing social IRL either, so it's a replacement, right? You know. So I mean, again, this is my age showing, but because when I was growing up, like the big kind of consoles were the 64 and the PlayStation 1. Whenever we wanted to play together, we still had to go over each other's houses and bring our controllers and such. And then we play like Mario Kart together, right? Or we play like Smash 64 and stuff together and those sorts of games. Whereas now that's like no longer the case, right? Like you don't do that anymore. You just hop on PSN or Xbox Live and you play Fortnite. And I'm not saying that's bad. That's like a really good evolution. That's actually a great evolution, right? That's what technology should do. But it's why like all these games have like the social element in them because it hooks them, in a good way. But and it's also great too because you don't have like you never have to like worry about like, oh, who am I going to play with? I don't have anyone to play with. But the downside of that, kind of the trade-off, is that we don't have the same, you're able to like really immerse yourself in the game because the game also becomes your social circle. Like so it becomes more addictive in that way. And so if you're trying to design a more addictive video game, multiplayer game that like never ends, um yeah, that like really helps quite a lot. So you never have to see the outside ever again. Do you think devs should consider how fun it is to watch these games? I feel like the massive success lately has been pushed by content creators a lot. Then again, might be a consequence and not a cause of the success. It's really hard to say. I do think that how fun a game is to watch is really important to the overall successfulness of it. Not in a like causation way, like if your game isn't like fun to watch, then it's not going to sell. But I do think that if a game is really fun and has like a lot of, am I using this term correctly? Emergent gameplay. It's like a fucking buzzword. I don't know if I'm using that right. But if it has a lot of that in it, then then yeah, that makes it like really fun to watch, really engaging to watch. And when it is, there is a much higher chance that like people are going to be like, "Oh, I want to try playing that," right? I'll give you a perfect example of this. Have you guys ever heard of like that Japanese like fruit puzzle game Suika, where you merge the fruit and make a watermelon, and it went viral, and people were streaming it because everyone was trying to like get the watermelon. It's like a Switch eShop game. It's really fun. It's like $3. But that game's really fun to watch, right? And so people like really love watching people try to get the watermelon and go through like all stages of grief whenever they get their game over and such. So I do think it's like really crucial to make a game that's fun to like also like, sit and watch. However, I want to emphasize though, with making a game that's fun to watch, you also need to keep in mind that a fun game to watch also should mean not just fun to watch a cutscene, right? Like, so it shouldn't just be like, oh, that game is fun to watch because um when the cutscene comes on, the story is interesting, right? It should be like, oh, that game is fun to watch because when that game is being played, it's fun, right? There shouldn't just be like, yeah, good cutscenes make it a good game to watch because reacting to cutscenes is one thing, but I think that when you're reacting to gameplay, that's when um that's when you're getting somewhere interesting with the game. One Hollow Goku, thank you so much for the super chat. I have two Gen Alpha nephews, and they play Fortnite and Roblox, but they also love KH, so I'm thankful for that. That's awesome. I do feel like KH is like really good for like KH is like really good for like Gen Alpha and Gen Z or younger Gen Z. I feel like they would click really hard with KH. KH is kind of timeless in that way. Um and that's why if you're going to talk about doing a remake of anything, this is where everyone hates me. But like a remake of Kingdom Hearts 1 could be beneficial, maybe. This is where they're like, shut the fuck up. Because every time someone mentions a remake of Kingdom Hearts 1, people get so upset. But that would be like an interesting idea. I've seen so many people, like even Kingdom Hearts content creators, get ratioed over like mentioning like the prospect of a Kingdom Hearts 1, but out like remake, but I'm like everything else is already getting remade anyway. So like a Kingdom Hearts 1 remake would like not be a big fucking deal. Like I don't know. A Kingdom Hearts 1 remake would make more sense than like fucking, and I like this game a lot too, but like a Kingdom Hearts 1 remake would make more sense than fucking RE4 remake even. And RE4 is a great game, and so is its remake, but like, yeah. Uh because wondering on this topic, I think FF16 is terrible to watch and is not a good game for content creation. Oh boy, I could talk about this, but like is I could talk about this quite a bit. Oh, how should I? Oh, they would. Hmm. Yeah. Talk about it. I agree with you that it's not. It's a okay. So here's the thing. I think it is a very. It's complicated. It's complicated. Okay, let me put it to you like this. Let me use a different game as an example to kind of illustrate like why that probably is. Actually, I could talk about it directly, maybe. Okay, so the thing with Final Fantasy 16, whenever I watch, I wouldn't say it's not a fun game to watch because whenever I watch high level FF16 players play FF16, seeing some of the things that they do is really interesting, right? Like it's really cool. So I've seen like some clips of like high level FF16 players doing like really interesting stuff with the game in like a very like really interesting way that they combo and they exploit things that like normal people would not think to do. But I think like what probably makes FF16 like not necessarily as watchable is like the probably like the curve of uh the skill floor and the skill ceiling is like a weird curve maybe. Like it's interesting to watch the high level players do stuff, but like when you watch like the lower level players do something, it's like it's not that fun or interesting to watch. Because the lower level players are gonna just like kind of like mash through it and just cooldown spam, and like it won't be as engaging to watch. Now, you may be thinking, isn't that the case with like literally every video game? Not necessarily, right? Like and like because like the perfect counter example would be like watching someone play like let's say Elden Ring, right? And watching Kai, for example, play Elden Ring. And now when Kai first started his Soulsborne journey, he sucked. We all do when watching, or when starting like our first Souls game. We all are like really terrible. But it's kind of like really fucking funny actually to watch someone go through all that. It's kind of like really entertaining um to watch someone do all that. And so um actually I would say that Souls is most boring to watch when you're kind of like good but not necessarily great. So like the majority of people, like the high skill players and the vast majority of people who are just kind of like, jumping around, like trying to figure things out and watching them make mistakes. It's like it's almost like watching like, those video compilations of like, like people falling down and doing like stupid shit and like America's funniest home videos type shit. That's like what Souls games are in like a in like a video game form in terms of like watching lower skilled players play. And so I think that like if you're asking like why FF16 like in terms of like streamers playing it like isn't as like maybe like as fun to watch as something like that, I think it's just because that like FF16 like watching like a lower level player play FF16 where everyone is going to like start out, probably fairly lower level and as you go into it with like a deep experience of hack and slash games is probably just not going to be that like entertaining kind of experience to watch. And the lack of a sort of like puzzle solving element really makes it kind of also too like you're not really watching someone solve the puzzle like as you would be like with the strategic RPG. So you're kind of just like watching again with like the medium skilled players all the way down to the skill floor. You're kind of just watching them mash square to get through the game, and they're not gonna put in that much effort. So I do think the FF16 can be entertaining to watch, but it's really only going to be entertaining to watch for like the highest skilled players doing a combat. I mean a combo video, and not like interesting to watch for like lower skill players who, because they don't have any difficulty in the game, are just going to result to spamming square. And also too, because there's no puzzle solving element, because there's no like you need to use these types of like skills in your kit and that type of stuff. They aren't going to be pushed to experiment with that kit, and because they're not going to like get into the nitty gritty of their kit, they aren't going to really create really interesting gameplay. So that's why, yeah, 16 you may have felt like it's not as fun to watch. And then another problem that I think that it also has with like in terms of like watchability of people playing it is that I think the demo section was like really amazing at that. I mean, objectively speaking, the demo was amazing at that, right? Like you remember watching people's reactions to the demo? Like, wasn't that shit like fucking incredible? Like watching people's demo reactions. And that's because of the cutscene watch along, right? Like we're all watching it, reacting to it like it's a video. I do think that 16 has like a lot of moments like that, like when you're watching someone do like an icon fight for the first time. Like, you know, if you're watching someone doing like Titan Lost or like the Bahamut fight or something like that, that shit's fucking cool to watch. Like watching their reactions go through that. However, I think that like 16's like reaction story moments are like just far and few between. Like there's few moments where it's like, oh, we have to wait for this moment. Like the chat like is like freaking out because oh my god, they're gonna get to this moment. I'm going to contrast this with a different CPU 3 game, and that's gonna be Final Fantasy 14 Shadowbringers, where I think Shadowbringers had this effect where everyone was like gripped, like because they were like, oh my god, this next section though, this next section, this next section, this next section, and every single section of Shadowbringers is like one that people cannot wait for people to get to so that they can clip it and freak the fuck out together. Thunders Productions, thank you so much for the 2 gift subs or the 2 gift memberships. I appreciate that a ton. How are you doing, dude? Thanks for joining us today. Appreciate you. So, yeah, it's just like Shadowbringers, like yeah, aside from the trolley, I agree, syntax error. Um, Shadowbringers was like, oh, that scene. Oh, that scene. Yeah, and so everyone was like really hooked into to Shadowbringers. And of course, I do think that FF16 does have like those moments where it's like, oh fuck, that was so cool. That was like the coolest thing ever. The problem is that FF16 has a lot of moments where it's like it's not the coolest thing ever to watch. It's like literally 2 characters standing like really still, delivering lines to each other, which made it like really difficult to get through. And a lot of it just didn't feel consequential in such a way that it was like, um, oh, I need to like be gripped into this. It was kind of like, well, I'll check out of this and then come back when the interesting thing is happening. Interestingly, I felt a different dynamic impacted with Rebirth's watchability amount of content, which is great as a player. But as an example, even I didn't want to watch Max Dude go through all the world intel most of the time I tuned in. He was doing the side content. Yeah, that's another thing too, right? Is that Rebirth also had that problem compared to Remake. Like, Remake is a lot easier to watch than Rebirth. Like I didn't want to watch like a Rebirth playthrough, but but like watching a Remake playthrough is fun, right? Like I love to go through some of my fellow content creators and like see like their Remake playthroughs. But then Rebirth was just not fun to like really watch. And that sucks too cuz I think Rebirth is a better game as a player, but like yeah, do you really want to watch someone go do all the intel, the world intel? Or the side content and like stuff like that. So like yeah, Rebirth kind of suffered from that a lot too. I do think that Rebirth is interesting to like watch like its main story content. Like its main story content is very good. And actually if you play straight through the main story, I feel like it's actually a pretty fucking solid follow-up to Remake. Uh and it's not even paced as nearly as bad as people say. If you play straight through that game, it's actually paced very well. But yeah, that the problem is that the game throws so much at you that you're going to want to go and do all that other stuff. And maybe a hot take too, maybe a hot take, but I've actually come to the point of where I believe the definitive way to play Rebirth is to actually ignore all the side content and just play straight through the game. And it won't make you under level because of the way the game is scaled. I think that you should actually skip all the side content and Rebirth for your first playthrough. I think you should straight up just play it straight through as a linear game. And then when you go back on hard mode, then do all the side quests and stuff. And then think of like all the side content as like a giant like post game that you can do. And if you play Rebirth like that, I guarantee you like your opinion of it will be like tremendously like more positive than like if you try to like 100% that game on the first go around and then you try to start hard mode. Okay, I'm glad that's not a hot take. I'm seeing a lot of agrees in chats. Okay, I'm glad because yeah, that's the pacing improved dramatically when I stopped doing 100% after Junon. That's the thing, right? Like Rebirth is actually a well-paced game with so much side content that the player feels like they need to do. And actually, too, okay, so the biggest reason I say do that is because if you do it like that, what you'll actually notice is that, oh my god, Rebirth is actually paced really fucking well. There's just so much stuff that I want to do, and I don't want to miss anything, that I'm stuck doing this. So a lot of people are saying the problem with Rebirth is that there's too much content. That's not really the problem, right? It's awesome that there's so much content. And what's even more awesome is that the game only had 3 years of development time, according to them. And they were able to get it out. That's really awesome, right? But I think instead of celebrating this game that took 3 years to make and is like a 200 or 300 hour platinum, we've been shaming it instead. And I get why people are shaming it because it seems like so much. But I think that but I think that negative perception of it being so much would be radically different if the game was better at encouraging you to play the game first and explore the world second, which is actually funny, by the way, right? Because there was another game that encouraged you to kind of play the game first and then go back and save all the side content for the end. Do you guys know which game I'm talking about? I'm talking about fucking Final Fantasy 1 through 10. All the Final Fantasies prior, that's actually what they did. Is that you played pretty much straight through the story. You kind of did like a side content thing here and there, but most of the actual side content was post game. It wasn't a thing that you actually did like mostly throughout the game. Like you might be able to play the card game or do like blitzball, but like for the most part, like there wasn't like a ton of things to actually do until you like beat the game, and then there was like super bosses and other stuff to like go do. Um, funny enough, like how I play games is somewhat framed around that, around like how old school RPGs used to do it. And like maybe it's just me, but I actually think that's like a more fun way to play video games in general. I actually think that beating the story first and doing side content later is actually just like a fundamentally funner way to experience a game. I like and like this is why I never be like a director or anything because I would make it so that you just do the story first. And then the post game opens up and then like there's like a ton of like side quests and stuff. Like I would actually make it so that the stories in my games were like strictly linear and then you get to the end and then there's like a whole plethora of like content for you to do. I just be like play through the story like a film and then go do all the side content. Because I'm like, why and like from the perspective of the stakeholder too, I'm like, people don't even complete these games. Why are we spending all this money and time like front loading all the side content that ensures that they won't complete the game and then they won't pick up, Night Sky Prince video game 2 because they're like, oh well I didn't complete Night Sky Prince video game 1. But I did play like 100 hours worth of side content. As you guys can tell, I have severe ADHD. So I do prefer to focus on main story content first, primarily. Because that's actually how games get beaten for me. Because if I go down the side, I'm like the opposite maybe of most people with chronic ADHD, but I think it's like my coping mechanism, right? Where other people they're like, "Oh, I have to do all the side quests, otherwise I get distracted." I'm like, I have to hyper focus on the main story because if I don't, then I'll be all over the place and I'll never want to move back onto the main story because I'm like, what if I miss something? I should spend 200 hours doing Queen's Blood because what if I miss a card? So I don't know. I do prefer like side content at the end. Like if I can't get enough of the game, then be like, okay, well then here's like 20 side stories and stuff like within the world that you can go do. So I think that side content in old FF was so hard that most people ignored it. Now it's just a menial task we feel compelled to do. Also, previous FF side content barely had story. Now we are not sure if we missed some cool story. Right, that's another trade-off too, right? Like for example, and I know it's controversial to say, I would have enjoyed FF16 a lot more if I skipped most of the side quests. In fact, I want to do a playthrough where I play through FF16 again and I skip all the side quests to see like how I feel different about the pacing, because I decided to do every side quest in FF16 and it ended up really making that game like not fun for me because of the side content. Um, and that shouldn't be like the thing, right? Because a new icon fight was about to start, and then 20 side quests would pop up, and it's actually funny too, because we talked about this before, but Final Fantasy VII Remake Part One conditioned me both for 16 and for Rebirth that I should be doing all of these side quests because there's a chance that I might miss a side quest, and if I miss a side quest, then like I may not be able to go back and do it until I replay the game. And so, like remake made me scared that I'm like, oh, I should just do all the side quests. I think that's like a really big. I think that problem affected Rebirth though more than it impacted 16. But like it definitely impacted both for me. It definitely made me play through both with the perspective of like you need to play everything. You need to do all the side quests. I think you nailed it. Yeah, especially for Rebirth, right? Like yeah, 7R like basically was like if you don't do everything, you're gonna miss like really important stuff or like so. And then 7R also had like part one also had that issue too, where it was like you have to do all the side quests in the chapter for it to like basically save as a clear for the side quests in that chapter. So and speaking of 16 side content, like why the fuck was there no super bosses in that game? Like real super bosses. I don't mean like the hunts either. I mean like a real super boss. That game should have had like that should have been like super boss of the game. Like not even kidding. Like there should have been so many like cool secret bosses in 16. All the budget went to the icon fights. I mean that's kind of the core problem with like a lot of the game though too is that like the icon fights are really expensive to produce and so other stuff had to get like kind of like the budget had to be ran thin. And you notice that when you see like a lot of the cutscenes again, and it's very stiff characters like talking to each other while a camera just fixates on the character's portrait. And there's like no animation in the scenes. And a lot of the game's cutscenes are like that. So they don't have like real animation or cinematography to them. Um, I don't think your opinions on 16 side quests are that controversial at all. Dude, if you post them on Twitter, you'll get like fucking obliterated. Like I've like shared that on Twitter before, and people fucking like people flip the fuck out. So Thornton, Xenos, or Emmett would have made great super bosses, dude. I'd have, I'd be like a major fucking stan of that game if like Xenos or Emmett was like a fucking super boss, or like Thornton, like anything else the game could have done. Like I would have been like, I don't care. Xenos super boss, don't care. That's something that's in most AAA games now, though, with the stiff, boring combos. It is, however, I think that like with a lot of the AAA games now doing the stiff, boring combos, a lot of it is a little bit more bearable because what they do is well, in 16, a lot of the dialogue goes on for a really long time, oftentimes more longer than it needs to be, and the reason is I mean, that's just like a CPU 3 thing. Like, it also happens in Final Fantasy 14 as well, where characters could honestly just say the thing in like a couple of messages, but it goes on and on and on. Yeah, it lore dumps like quite a bit when it could have been like, you know, a few short messages and they essentially like dump a ton of stuff in there. I feel like it would have been or like other AAA games can get away with it a lot easier. Like Final Fantasy VII Remake, right? Like, and not to say that remakes, part one that is, like side quests are like great, but like we didn't really talk about like how like stiff most of those scenes were because like they're pretty short, right? Like you do the side quest and then it's pretty much over. It's very fast. Where again, a lot of the dialogue is like very like in 16 is very long-winded and yeah. So you're right, a lot of AAA games do have it, but like 16 did a few small things that were differently and those different things made it a little harder in 16 to kind of sit through than they're way less diff in remake than 16. That's also true, right? Like I do think that like eh, they are less stiff even in part one of remake because at least like Cloud will do like certain like stock animations and stuff. Whereas like in 16, it's literally just two characters like flatly talking. And then also too, I think that like some of the characters you come across in remake are like a kind of like a little bit more interesting, I should say, and a lot more like I'm saying this in a complimentary way. They're more cartoonish, which is to say that they're more lively. Like they're more of like a character, expressive in certain ways, and so they end up being a little bit more intriguing to like figure out like what's going on with this guy, right? Like like a Johnny, for example. Um, you're kind of like what the fuck is this guy doing? And it's silly and it's kind of fun and it's interesting. Whereas I think like with 16, the characters are meant to be a lot more realistic, and so as a consequence of it being more realistic, the characters are more just like regular people, which you could definitely view as an advantage of the storytelling. But the kind of like other side of that too is that you kind of lose uh the pizzazz, like the flair, the sauce, however you may want to say. That kind of makes it like, a little silly, but also fun and engaging to interact with. Um, so yeah, 16's characters are more realistic, but then they also kind of lose the edge, kind of the advantage that comes with being um, something that's more stylized and not meant to be taken as serious, and something that's a bit more goofy, and it can lean into that and be like really engaging, right? Um, so that's kind of like why that the side quests there are like that. And I actually, what's funny too, though, is that I don't disagree with people who aren't necessarily fans of the side quests either, because they're like they love how the side quests kind of enrich the lore and like a lot of the content they contain. I don't think that 16's like side quest is necessarily like a writing problem for like why they weren't like, or not a writing problem in the sense of like the idea of the idea of the stories behind them, because I agree actually they did kind of enhance the world of Valistia in that sense. I just think that the problem really came in the delivery of 16 side quests. And yeah, as someone in chat mentions here, they also had like a gameplay problem as well, where the gameplay was just kill the monster and then return to the quest giver, and there wasn't really anything interesting or outside of the norm of gameplay that you'd see in the side quest. It was literally just it's kind of the same thing each time. Talk to a person, kill a monster, go find a thing, and then return to the quest giver. Um, so the actual flow of it was the problem. So I think that that's something for CPU3 to look at and just like, okay, how can we make the delivery more interesting? And then how can we also shake the gameplay up through doing that side quest? 14 has the same problem. Okay. And that's kind of the issue, right? Is that most of 16's problems aren't new things. Like most of 16's problems aren't like specifically 16 problems. They're 14 problems, either not as bad or worse. Like, right? Depending on like which problem it is. Some problems are not as bad as 14. Some problems are way worse than 14. And so yeah, so the problem is that the FF16 side quest is like the yellow quest in 14. Right. That's what it is. And like what I would have preferred is like none of the yellow quests, but then like the FF16 side quest felt more something like the raid series or more something like something like that. Some of the more ambitious content in 14. But I get the cost was a huge factor in that. But again, the cost of the icon fights were like so massive that you really couldn't have time to like, add in that type of stuff with just how much the icon fights were. So, um, 14 has way too many side quests. They need to clean them up and focus on making side quests sharp. Yellow quest syndrome shouldn't exist. But yeah, I mean, but the thing is that you need content to fill out, playtime. I mean, and that's kind of like the greater issue with all side quest like design in general is just that like we need content to pad playtime, right? Like that's like really what it comes down to make people feel like there's so much to do. And so, um, 14 has the exact same problem with content being too easy until you get the super hard stuff again post game. Yeah. I think that players are also too with 14 are like they're wanting something to actually be hard, right? Like one of the problems that FF14 has is that you can get all the way to the current expansion and just straight up not know how to play the game. Which I think is good to in some ways it's good for player retention, but it's not good for like creating like a fun immersive game. Like if you just want to get people through to the end, that's fine. But yeah. And then another problem with it too is that I think that they're overhauling it in the next patch or something like that, but like the tutorialization for 14 is like terrible. Right? Like you don't actually learn most of the tutorialization and that stuff. The MSQ is not supposed to be skill gated. If you want to get in the scavages ultimates, that's there for you. Right, no. I'm just saying that like and I get that, but like I actually do think that like they should skill gate some stuff. Like not like tremendously so, but like they should have some content where it's like you need to get better. You need to learn how to do the thing. I actually think the game would kind of benefit from that. From just like telling players like there are certain sections where you're just gonna need to learn how to play the game. Um, I understand the reason they don't do that is because for player retention, it sucks because what if a player gets stuck on something and then they can't skill through it no matter how hard they try. I understand, but I really do think that like players would get a better experience from the thing if there were things where I think people would actually be more hooked on the game if there were certain sections where it was just like you can't get through this part and not know this mechanic. You have to go learn it. And I actually think that not only that, but I think people would have more fun doing the harder content later if they did have those skill checks where they had to like learn how to do a certain thing and they got to like the feeling of accomplishment from having to do that. I think that would actually tremendously benefit the game. I know that it's one of those things that you look at and like and you're like, okay, but then people may like turn the game off. But oftentimes people don't turn the game off. A lot of times what happens is that people like get like obsessed and then they get hooked in. So like for example, right? Like when you for I mean like and maybe this isn't the best comparison cuz not everyone is into like Souls games and I'm not saying every game should be like a Souls game, but there's a lot of like things that like you get to in like Souls games where it's just like you do have to learn how to do this. And like the game is just not going to continue otherwise. And a lot of those are actually like kind of like my favorite moments in games because I actually become a better person after I do it. Um, and so, and that's not to say every game should be a Souls game, but I'm just using that as an example of like, it actually increasing my enjoyment of the game from having to be like, you have to do this. Like, there's no way out of doing this. You can't cheese it. You can't like, uh, you can't fucking like, there's nothing you can do. I can't stand Souls games because losing progression is such a waste of time. Well, you only lose like your souls, runes, blood echoes, and you do have to start back over to the thing. But actually, I'm not gonna lie. Like when I first started playing, like some of those Souls games, that like crushed me. Right, like when I started, like, because I started playing Bloodborne recently, for example, too. And I was like, oh, I was like, I died, and I had to go all the way back, and I was like, fuck. But it, like, actually, like halfway through the playthrough, my brain started rewiring, like how I look at things, like how I look at like difficulty and like adversity. Like halfway through, I started to be like, wait, there has to be a way. And then you start discovering shortcuts, and then you start saying, well, okay, I'm gonna start leveling up. And then you start playing with your kit. And then you start kind of like figuring stuff out. Like, okay, if I can do this and this, and this is gonna get me back to the same point faster. And so really it actually made me like toward the end, I actually like really enjoyed I really started to enjoy it, which again, to people that don't play like a Souls game, it looks like masochism because it's like, why the fuck would you enjoy this? Um, but actually, it really starts to feel like you're really progressing. I don't know how to explain it. But again, I'm not saying that every game should be a Souls game. I'm not saying that 14 should be a Souls game. I'm absolutely not saying that. Don't say I'm saying that. I'm not saying that. I'm just using that because it's like the lowest hanging fruit example of like difficulty in games and like why sometimes having difficulty actually makes you appreciate the game in a way that like you cannot appreciate it until that difficulty is like confronted, right? So like Kingdom Hearts 2 is also like another like really great example. Like you guys remember people would say like Kingdom Hearts 2 is press triangle to win. There's like no depth to Kingdom Hearts 2. That's what people said when like Kingdom Hearts 2 like original came out. When in reality Kingdom Hearts 2 is a very deep system, right? But like because there is no challenging content in Kingdom Hearts 2 vanilla, there was nothing to ever make people like look into the depth of Kingdom Hearts 2's system. Because of that, they left with the impression that Kingdom Hearts 2 has no depth. Why wouldn't they leave with that impression when there's nothing to make people look into their kit? Then Final Mix comes out and Critical Mode comes out, and now all of a sudden they're like, wait, actually Kingdom Hearts 2 is like one of the deepest action games ever made. What the fuck? And so difficulty is very much interlinked to how deep people perceive a game is. Because you will not start really looking into everything the game does until you are confronted with something that forces you to do that, right? And so this is kind of where I disagree if we're talking about 16. This is kind of where I disagree with some people where they say that like, oh, the depth is there, you have to go look for it, right? The problem is that people that's not how human behavior works. People don't just go looking for the depth when there is not something there to make them do it, which is why people want to play on harder difficulties in the first place, is that depth causes you to dig deep into the kit and like really um understand like what the fuck it is that you're doing and why you're doing it and all the advantages and disadvantages of all your different things in your kit. And so until that difficulty is there, you really don't feel it. But this is also why players who play on Ultimaniac will like preach the gospel of how deep 16 is as an action game. But it's just like, but unfortunately Ultimaniac is you can't do all the Ultimaniac trials until you have completed the game twice, essentially, right? Players are not going to just find the depth without challenge. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. They will not just dig deep into like or I should say it's not that everyone won't. Most people will not dig deep into the game until like they have to, until they're confronted with the boss that makes them do that. I'll give you guys a great example. I think I told you guys about this when I played when we played Final Fantasy X together. I did not use the sphere grid all the way until what do you call it? What's the name of the location, chat, where you first get Riku as a party member and she like attacks and tries to kidnap Yuna, and Tidus and Waka have to fight underwater. What's the name of that location again? Not the Thunder Plains. It's before the Thunder Plains. It's before the Thunder Plains. And like God, I even know the music. The music is I think it's Moonflow. Is it Moonflow? Let me look. I think it's Moonflow. I can't fucking remember the name of that location. Yes, it's Moonflow. So I got all the way to Moonflow and didn't use the sphere grid as a kid. Do you guys know why I got all the way to Moonflow and not use the sphere grid? Because one, I was dumb. I thought the S levels were just my characters leveling up. So I didn't know. And then two, I didn't really have a tremendous problem with anything up until that point. So I just kept playing the game. And then I skipped through the tutorial like when I first got it because I was like, yeah, get back to the game. I'll figure it out later. And so a few hours later, I'm in Moonflow, and I have to do that fight with just Tidus and Waka. And I'm like, oh my god, this is so hard. I keep dying. And I kept dying for like hours, right? Like come home from school every day, try to beat it. And then one day I was like, I'm gonna look in the menus and play around with stuff in here, see if there's anything that can help me. Damn, hours? Yeah, bro, I was not smart. I was not smart. I was not smart at all. And then I was like, wait, there's a fucking grid in here? And I was like, these circles remind me of Materia. Because the only other FF game I had played at that point was 7. So I was like, oh, this is tight. Let's fucking go. I was like, and I felt so stupid, by the way, but because like I had no idea. By the way, guys, because I thought the S levels were my characters like leveling up, I actually went back and like leveled a shit ton. So I had like a crap ton of S levels, and like yeah, I like leveled my characters all up like insanely all at once. Anyways, this is the value of having a difficult fight in your video game, by the way, is that you have like a young Ryan who goes through the whole game, does not look at the sphere grid, skips through the tutorial, and then is like, yeah, the whole thing is easy. And then he gets to a certain point, and then he's like, oh my god, actually, there's all this other stuff in the menus that I haven't looked at. Oh, that's what that's supposed to do. But then it gets cooler, right? The game gets cooler at that point because now I realize, okay, there's depth in this thing. So I do think that having like something that challenges the player and makes them be like, I can't win with my current strats, what else can I do? Is really important to a video game, in my opinion. Because otherwise, why would a player want to get good at something they're already good at doing? You know what I'm saying? Like, let me ask you something. Would any of you want to get better at pouring a glass of water? No? Why would you not want to get better at pouring a glass of water? Well, because no matter how fancy I pour the water into the cup, the water still just gets into the cup. I can do a backflip and then put the water in a cup, or I could just pour the water in the cup. You know, it's easy. You don't have to think about it. So people will always just do the thing that's easy and that they don't have to think about, right? It's not until you present a challenge and then people start digging deep into like what they're supposed to do. Josh, thank you so much for this super chat. People skipping tutorial really pisses me off because then they turn around and blame the game design when they didn't fucking read. Huge pet peeve. I understand where you're coming from, and there are people that do that. Like that would have been me as a kid. I would have been like, you know, stupid boss fight. But um, you know, at the same time though, too, I think it's worth it because most people you can have like a little bit of faith in. What a strange analogy. It is a strange analogy. It's a terrible analogy. And I probably shouldn't have used it, but that's like the only thing I can think of, like off the cuff. Like, um, I guess like maybe a better analogy would be like, I don't know, like why would you learn to be like a race car driver if all you're doing is like driving on normal roads, right? With everyone else. Like that's a better analogy, right? Like you don't need to learn how to drive NASCAR, right? So why would you ever want to learn how to drive NASCAR if you could just drive normally and get to work? Um, that's still probably not a good analogy, but you guys get what I'm trying to say here. Is that like that is the path of least resistance? What I think you mean, forcing people to activate their brain to find the sauce. And I have no faith in humanity. I'm a tech support guy, of course. Yeah, your faith in humanity is like thoroughly black pilled if you're in tech support. Like, but I mean that what I'm trying to say is too is that like until you make people have some type of like thing, some type of like mountain to overcome, even if it's just like a small anthill, people will never even think about how to do something or like why they should do something when or anything else like that. That's why difficulty is so important. You ever get through a game and then there are certain mechanics like you never even fucking touched? And you're just like, what is that even for? um right. And then if you go back through that same game on hard, you'll be like, oh shit, why did I never touch this? This is so useful. Like this mechanic is kind of the game, actually, in a way. Um, I think that that is why difficulty, appropriate difficulty, is good. And I'm not saying that every game should be like the hardest game ever for sure. I just think that like every game needs that checkpoint where it's like this is the point where you need to have been paying attention by. And if you're not paying attention by this point, then like go back and like figure that shit the fuck out because this is the game and we're going to force you to engage with the game. My biggest pet peeve is that Rebirth tutorials didn't really teach you to get aerial very well. I still find people who don't realize they can get airborne. Yeah, no, you're right, Subtext. I think that they should have had something there where it's like if you don't learn how to get airborne, you cannot proceed. Like I think that that's like that should have been like so essential. Um, even if they have even if they have to have characters shout at you like get airborne, hold the square button. Like it's still not a bad idea. You doing another podcast with the guys sometime soon? Um, I do want to get on a schedule where it's like bi-weekly, right? Like if like and not necessarily with the same guest, but like to the point of where weekly or bi-weekly where we can have like a guest on like a Friday or something and like every like so often we have somebody on and we talk about stuff. Hold the square button, Soldier Boy. Yeah, that would have been funny. NSP podcast, good dummy heart. Dude, I'm such a loser though because every time I do a podcast, it's like, you know, we have like insane viewership and like people love it and people are like, please, please fucking do another one. And the viewership is great. And like, even like stuff like the ad revenue and things are great, the metrics we YouTubers care about. But like I'll do it and then I'll be like, yeah, yeah, I'm gonna do another one. And then the ADHD hits and then I never schedule another one. So I do need to like you're so right. Those are always really good and people love them. And I even have like other content creators like I've had so many content creators like begging, to come on the show because they just like it doing it. Like they just love watching other people on the show so much that they themselves want to participate. So um the fact that I haven't like routinely figured out like a consistent schedule for the podcast, I think is like the biggest L I have on me right now as a content creator. Count me as a beggar. Subtext, I'd love to have you on here, bro. I think that would be great to have you on here. Um, but yeah, I have a lot of people that want to come on here even. So, as for why I don't have it regularly, the answer is I don't fucking know why I don't have it regularly because the fans ask for it regularly, the peers ask for it regularly. Um, everyone asks for it regularly, so I don't know why I haven't done it. The ADHD strikes again, yes sir. That and like every time like whenever I'm gonna ask someone, I have to like work up the executive function and the courage to like be like, hey, come on here. And also too, like some people have to be careful with who I invite to because and not like every like there's a lot of like bad people or anything too. But I just feel like if they come on here, I feel like some takes they may give might be like I have to be like, hey, people may get mad if you say certain things too. So your friends ask for it regularly. My friends and also like just other content creators, there are people who are like, I want to come on and do a talk with you. Like if you're gonna do like one. So basically, like everyone wants me to produce it. And I also want me to produce it, but I still don't do it. And the reason is because I can't function as a human being. That's why it doesn't happen. But it's like, yeah. Bring on Ben Starr. Oh, I love to bring on Ben Starr. That's like, and that's like another L too, because I could have easily had him on during the FF16 like hype window. I could have easily reached out to him, and I know him, and he would have done it. But I just, yeah, I was just like, well, he's probably busy with stuff, and he was busy with stuff. Uh, in fact, like the day I first met Ben, incredible guy by the way. He was like, yeah, I've been up for like 4 days, and I was just like, what the fuck? I love this guy. And yeah, because he was going that hard on promoting the game. Um, so yeah, he's a really cool guy. And I'm just like, Jesus Christ, man. This guy is like seriously passionate. I feel like you kind of tone down the 16 content too because you have mixed feelings on it. I do, and I feel like if I do like 16 content and like whenever those mixed feelings are like kind of apparent, it does kind of upset the people who are like really, really big fans of it. So they get mad at me and I just take L's. It's actually very funny because like one of the things that I think is so hilarious is that people will say like I dislike the game for clicks. They'll be like, "Oh, you hype up a game for clicks and then you dislike it." And that's actually like fundamentally not true. Because actually what happens is that whenever I don't like a game, it actually negatively impacts me, especially like a Final Fantasy game. It actually negatively impacts my everything, viewership, mental health because I have people that are angry at me for it, and I don't deal well with that. And then potential like sponsor stuff too, right? Because like if they know that you don't like a thing, then why would they reach out to you to do it? Um, so actually there is like literally not a single upside that I get from like not liking a thing. Like it actually only has downsides to me. Like especially if it's FF. Like if I dislike an FF thing, that means that like I literally only get like literally only bad things happen actually. Um I had that perception of you before, but of course I saw you more often and that was quickly destroyed. Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, so I get like no benefits like whatsoever. It is literally like if I dislike a Final Fantasy game, I'm like literally punished um for disliking it in every single metric that you can imagine. Yeah, it's like literally like lose 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 um every time that I publicly say, yeah, I really didn't like that thing. Um the channel and brand that I have is more predicated on enjoying a thing and having hype and being excited for stuff. I don't make like rage bait videos, right? Like you could say I was disliking it for clicks if I made like a negative review, like a 4 hour negative review on it, and it had like 300,000 views or something, and I was making like hella like ad rev money on it. Right? Like then you could say, "Oh, he hyped it up and then he disliked it for money." But actually what happens is that I like hype if I had liked something or I should say if I don't like something, I kind of just talk about it less. Which means if I'm talking about it less, well okay, well then I have less content. Um so then if I have less content, um then I make less money. Okay, well then I also get less views. And then also growth is bad. And then also the sponsorships opportunities for anything related to that game is gone. Oh, yeah. So I don't dislike yeah, so the idea that like at least in my case disliking anything for like a positive outcome on my end is like false. If anything, I try to find things that I like that I can make content around because yeah, if I don't, then other than that, um, the other like beneficiary thing that I could do is fake like something. Because if I fake like it, then I can also make content around it and just pretend that like that I'm okay with it. But then I don't like doing that. I don't like being, dishonest about liking something for the sake of profit, right? Or for the sake of like growth or anything like that. So, all of which is to say, I'm incredibly honest about all of my opinions related to this. And essentially, unless something explicitly says, when I'm doing like a sponsor video, for example, I'll say this video is sponsored. Then yeah, you know that like maybe I'm not saying like 100% everything that's like my feeling on something if I'm talking about the sponsor product because I'm doing an ad read. But aside from that, like if I'm just talking about how I feel about a game, then it's like that's you know me being real. So I'm not a very good I'm not a very good businessman because I just talk about how I feel too much, like legitimately. JT will play. Thank you so much for the super chat. People love how genuine you are though. Never change. Thank you so much for the super chat. I appreciate that. Yeah. But the thing is that being genuine does have a cost, right? Because if you are genuine, then it can hurt you, right? Because like always the case, like for like remakes ending, for example, if I like the arbiters, like the appropriate thing for me to do with the arbiters was to just say that I like the arbiters, right? And just milk fan theory videos. That was the most profitable business move I could have made, right? Like that would have been like objectively the correct move for me to make. But I didn't do it. I like when you make statements that are inflammatory, but you also genuinely believe it. Based. Uh, oh, that's so funny. Yeah. Anyway, that's why I don't why I didn't like really talk about it as much was because I'm like I'm not trying to just like and also too I'm not trying to like hate farm the game either, right? Like I do have like some like very deep criticisms of that game. Like it definitely did not hit on my expectations or what I hoped for, but like I still have like a tremendous amount of respect and love for everyone who worked on the game. Um for all the people who do like the game. A lot of my friends still, they came out on like a much more positive end than me. Um, you know, so there's a balance somewhere in there where I express, how I feel about certain things, without it becoming overbearing. This guy is such a fucking hater type of like statements, which some people they make hating a thing like their whole personality. I don't want like me not liking a thing to be like my whole personality, right? I think actually too, like with like say like remakes ending, and like the arbiters too, that was something I like really disliked. Um, but at the same time too, I'm very regretful about how I handled that. Because I think back on it, and I was like, dude, I didn't even hate the game. I actually like really I actually really liked the game. So it's like why am I like this like, cynical about it? Because but and part of that too was just like how much fans would like really push me. Not fans of me, but like fans of like, yeah. You sometimes verge into like doomer vibes. Dude, I'm a doomer. Like I'm not gonna lie to you. Like I do tend to like doom. And not even just with like FF, like with like life in general. I tend to like I do have a doomer side of me. Like I'm not gonna lie to you guys about that. It's very well known among my among my friends and family that I can be a doomer. Um so that's not even offensive. Like that's like a straight up character trait that I do have. You're not wrong to say that I do have like doomer tendencies. Like that's objectively a fact. I'm aware that I'm a doomer. Because you've been proven right on the worst cases too many times. See, that's why I think I'm a doomer too. Like that's why I think that like that's why I doom, right? It's because it's like I've known, like I've seen it be doom a lot of times. So I feel like I'm good at like calling the doom. But like yeah, so I don't even see it necessarily as I myself or as like I'm like the biggest doomer ever, but I just see it as like I like have like realistic projections about stuff. But like yeah. I'm aware that I can be like that I can definitely have like my cynical doomer side for sure. I try to be positive. Nico, what's up, man? Game industry in general is leaning toward doom. That's true. Based. When are you gonna play Bloodborne DLC? This week. This week. I have a problem where I say I'm gonna do a thing and then I end up not doing it. Um, it's this thing called lying that I do sometimes. I'm not doing that this time. I'm really gonna play the Old Hunters DLC. We might even start tomorrow, maybe, but we're gonna do it this week. Unless something major happens this week, like Final Fantasy 17, then now there's something crazy that like disrupts my content flow. But we're gonna start that. Literally, the reason I've had more optimism for some things was because I skipped almost 10 years of the franchise, but you took it head on. The doomerism is understandable. And that's also true. That Old Hunters DLC is tough, really? Okay, well that's what we're gonna be playing, and we're gonna get through it. Because actually, I think that like I think that most of the stuff on like uh I think most of the stuff in Bloodborne I've been like pretty decent at, but like so we'll see if Old Hunters DLC breaks me. I just got Ludwig's sword for the game, so we can do the DLC because I've been using the axe before that. But everyone's like, no, you need to use Ludwig's Holy Blade. That's where that fucking sauce is. And then I was like, oh, okay. And then I started playing around with it, and I was like, oh fuck, you guys were right. That shit does have the fucking sauce. The base game is actually not too bad, but the DLC is a jump. Oh fuck. Was there FF9 news I saw? Yeah, that was earlier on in the VOD. I'll cut a video of it later on. When you're a single IP creator, criticism and negativity is hated on immensely though. You might only be a doomer compared to hardcore lovers, right? But that's also why too that I've tried to branch into other things so that I'm not like a single IP creator because I have genuinely spent too long just making FF content and it's weird because I enjoy so many things that are not FF. So I don't know why for so many years I've limited myself to Final Fantasy this, Final Fantasy that. When I'm not in reality, I'm not a Final Fantasy this, Final Fantasy that guy. Like I enjoy so many different games and so much different content, but I guess I think that that's like what my audience like expects, but that's not necessarily true. I think Dawn Trail can cure your doomerism. It makes me smile. Yeah, I haven't really had the urge to go back to Dawn Trail, and that's not like disrespect to Dawn Trail or anything. I just really haven't had like the urge to go like finish it yet, but we'll see. Um and then also too um there's like some Persona content that I've been wanting to make. Like I've been wanting to make a video on Persona 3 for so long now. Like an essay video like I did for Final Fantasy X. NSP disliked remake, but it led to the most accurate rebirth theory. Other CCs seem way too invested. That is kind of true. Actually, I did kind of have some stuff like more accurate than other people. And part of that was because of the doomer, which is which is kind of funny. Like the Zack stuff, I feel like, and actually the final boss fight, which is so funny because I predicted the final boss fight like 4 years ago of Rebirth, which is like really, really fucking funny. Um, and other people told me that that was just like me being like negative or whatever the fuck, but it wasn't actually. That was actually like what really happened. Like when I said that Cloud and Zack were gonna fight Sephiroth together, everyone was like, "That's bullshit. That's not gonna happen. They're not gonna go that insane." And then that's exactly what happened. But you know what's funny though? Like what's funny is that that made me more receptive to it than other people. Because other people thought that it wasn't going that direction. They kind of convinced themselves that it was like going to be something else. So they got like really disappointed about it. But I was like, no, then that's exactly what it's going to be. Like that's like what it has to be, right? Like I don't see it being anything else. And then like when it happened, I was just like, yep. That fight on hard mode sucks balls. I believe it. I still haven't done hard mode yet. Oh, my Final Fantasy X essay has 66,000 views now. Nice. Nice. I'm looking at that because I'm thinking again, I really want to do a Persona one for Persona 3 where I talk about Persona 3's themes and like some of the story stuff. Part of me is like, will that video do well? But actually I did a video like that for Persona 5 Royal. And that video has 92,000 views. You gotta do one on Stranger of Paradise. Bro, what the fuck? What the fuck would I talk about with Stranger of Paradise's story for like longer than 5 minutes? I could not talk about that game for like longer than 5 minutes. I really don't have much to say. I really don't have much to say on that game story that I could talk about it for like at length. If I do one for Stranger of Paradise, it's got to be a YouTube short. Are you going to cover Expedition 33? What do you mean? I'm already covering Expedition 33. I've made videos on every single news update that's come out about it, which has been a total of 3 things. Yeah, 3 videos. I just made a Night Sky Kang video on Stranger of Paradise. Dude, I can't believe I came up with like the best side channel idea and then I just abandoned it. That's like the second NSPL since we're talking about my L's today. Is that I made like the best gaming comedy channel and then I like sat on it because I didn't have enough time to maintain it. But if I can ever bring NSK back, I will. That was the best shit I've ever done in my life. I still go back and like I look at like the Elden Ring video and stuff, and I'm just like, this is like the best thing I've ever made. This is like my actual talent as a content creator. What the fuck am I doing? Why am I wasting time? Oh man. Not that Kang. It's Night Sky King. But pronounced with a certain vernacular to it. Oh man. Yeah, I shouldn't have like dropped Night Sky King. Night Sky King should come back as a shorts channel for sure. Because I just feel like one day someone's gonna discover Night Sky King and then they're just gonna take it and they're just gonna do their own channel. And they won't be like an ADHD fuck like me. and then they'll make it work. But actually, I feel like no one else can really do that humor as good as me. I feel like someone else will try, but then it'll just get like dry and kind of boring. I feel like that type of offbeat humor is like so proprietary to me that if someone else does try, it's gonna suck so much ass compared to like me doing it. I know that's narcissistic to say, but it will. It'll suck ass. And yeah. I mean, now that I look through it, I have covered quite a few different games throughout the years. We're currently covering Metaphor. Um, we covered Stellar Blade. We did some Reynaudis videos, you know? I have diversity, I do. Persona, you know? I did one on Phantom Blade Zero. I did one on the Zelda movie and on Cyberpunk, which is cool. So yeah, I'm gonna do some shit. I'm gonna make, you know, some content that's not just FF. You could make a video of NSK then reacting to the fake NSK. Oh yeah, that's so funny. That's so funny. That would be hilarious. What's funny is that NSK is also still my Twitter profile picture. Final Fantasy influence has to diversify now since 2025 is Final Fantasy not in Final Fantasy and Final Fantasy not however you'd say it out loud. Yeah, but also too, I mean like I mean yes, but then also part of the reason that I diversify anyway is just like I enjoy talking about other stuff, and I also enjoy other games and stuff too. So I mean, we'll do the Bloodborne stream this week, maybe tomorrow even, and yeah, we'll have a good time playing fucking Bloodborne. In his K reviewing Bloodborne to evaluate if the hype is warranted would be funny as fuck. I think the problem is that NSK thinks Bloodborne's too easy. That's the problem. He's like another FromSoft baby game. That's the issue, bro. He was already bored his whole mind, out of his mind with Elden Ring. What's your Bloodborne weapon? I was using the axe, and now I'm using Ludwig's Holy Blade. Someone told me to switch over to that, and he was right. Because I was like, oh, this shit fucks. It feels like, because it's so fast that it feels like I'm playing Devil May Cry and everyone else is playing Souls. Like all the enemies are playing Souls. So I'm like, chop, chop, chop. The only thing is that I didn't level up skill enough, right? And you need skill to be able to like proficiently deal damage with it. So I was kind of like, ooh, I have to like put all my points into skill now for like the rest of my build, the rest of my playtime. So they shouldn't remake this. They should unmake it. Based. I might actually have to steal that one. NSK plays games for serious gamers like Balan Wonderland. Not only that, he plays Balan Wonderworld competitively. And he's the number one fucking champion at Balan Wonderworld. Like literally the number one champion. In fact, that's why sales for the game sunk so badly. Because everyone else quit playing. They were like, oh my god, dude. How can I get better at Balan Wonderworld? When Night Sky King like keeps kicking me the fuck off. Like every time I'd like rage quit. And I know what you're saying. Balan Wonderworld, that's not even a multiplayer game. It's not a multiplayer game for you. But for Night Sky King, it is. and he's the best at it in the whole world. It's a fact. He has the speedrun record on Balan Wonderworld. Yeah, because he's the only person who ever completed. That's why. That's why he has the speedrun world record. NSK got the name changed from Wonderland to Wonderworld because land is lame as shit. Honestly, no. I think NSK would be like, I'm not calling that shit Wonderworld because Wonderland sounds better. Honestly, Wonder World always trips me up. That's why I started stuttering a second ago. I was like, oh yeah, it's Wonder World. NSK would be like, no, I'm calling that shit fucking Wonder World or fucking Wonderland because I'm not playing with that shit. Nice Guy King always plays as a cat girl in every video game because he's already platinumed masculinity, Bryce. He's already done it. There's no point. So he has to be a cat girl because that's the only way he can he can experience new things. World record is 1 hour, 6 minutes, and 2 seconds. That's insane that someone even like did that just to have like a world record for something. Why did someone, because in order to even get that that speed run down, they had to play it quite a few times. NSK understands that the peak of masculinity is actually femininity based. Oh man. Okay. All right. So here's the plan. Um Tomorrow I am going to be back and we're going to be playing Bloodborne. Okay? It's actually going to happen. I'm going to schedule the stream for everyone on YouTube side. You'll be able to click the notify me button and we'll be playing the Old Hunters DLC. That will start at my regular time. If you want to come and watch me suffer, you are welcome to come and watch me suffer. I hope that you will make the podcast a regular thing. Okay, I'll tell you what. I am going to go ahead and figure out who I'm gonna have on, and we'll do another one maybe next week. Right? Did we even talk about TGS? No, I fucking forgot. We just talked about random shit. We didn't even get to TGS. Okay. I'll probably edit the title and just take TGS out because I'm um, we didn't even touch on it. I don't think there was that much big news in TGS. So, like it. All right. So we'll do Bloodborne tomorrow. That's the plan. I promise. Unless something wild comes up, watch Final Fantasy IX Remake gets announced tomorrow, just because I finally carry through on something I promised. Um, Watch. This shit always fucking happens, dude. All right. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bloodborne for sure, for sure. Promise. Hopefully nothing fucking stupid comes up and we don't have to do it. If you're on YouTube, if you're on Twitch, stick around for the raid. I love you guys so much, and I'll see you all tomorrow.